Our book today in the Thom Hartmann Book Club is Criminology on Trump by Greg Barak. This is from the introduction. Criminology on Trump is about family business, habitual lawlessness, and the struggle for economic and political power. The central character, Donald Trump, is a con artist, a master gaslighter, and a shrewd racketeer. It is the story of how the Houdini of white-collar crime and the founder and CEO of the Trump Organization operated a criminal enterprise from within an incorporated organization beginning in 1980 and continuing up to and from within the bowels of the White House for 4 years. At the same time, it's the history of the causation of the social, psychological, and physical harms connected to the Donald and his associates before, during, and after the presidency. This book is also an account of the activities that Donald Trump pursued in order to obtain the power of Commander-in-Chief of the United States, what he then did with that power of the bully pulpit once he achieved it, and finally the lengths to which he would go to keep from losing that power. Lastly, this is the story of what many elected and appointed politicos did or did not do to acquire or to forfeit their individual shares of Trumpian power. This overall analysis of the underside of the rule of law begs the question, had the Donald not become the 45th president of the United States, would he, his children, or the Trump Organization have found themselves formal defendants and legal adversaries of the people of the state of New York? My answer unequivocally would have been no way. As of January 6, 2022, the question remains open as to whether Donald Trump, as the former president, or any of his family members will ever be indicted and prosecuted for criminal tax fraud and the other felonies, along with the Trump Organization, Inc., and its CFO, Alan Weisselberg. From the point of view of newsmaking, lawlessness, and equal justice, much of the popular discourse surrounding Trump has to do with competing narratives. The most reverberating of these has been the dueling apocalyptic narratives traversing both old and new media platforms alike. One narrative has to do with witch hunts, hoaxes, fake news, global elites, and the deep state engaging in a myriad of underworld and otherworld conspiracies to bring down Trump. The other narrative has to do with saving the U.S. democracy from authoritarianism, recovering law and order from the damage, chaos, and trauma of Trump, and restoring American normalcy without all of that political insanity. While these two narratives capture the cultural conflict, the diverse groups of people at work here and the rival social movements of incompatible interests, desires, and visions, neither speaks to the fundamental structural conditions that generate the divisiveness between these two narratives. Without ever addressing these structural relationships, the two sides will remain at loggerheads for some time to come. The medium is always, as always, is still the message. And so far in the 21st century, social media is the medium. At the same time, the weaponizing of racism, misogyny, hate, fear, intimidation, and violence vis-a-vis social media is neither new nor unique to the United States. These socio-cultural expressions of the contradictions of patriarchy, neocolonialism, and capitalism have been around since the nation's inception. Today's Proud Boys are the contemporary versions of New England churchmen in the 1700s, the Klan riders of the 1800s, or the fervent followers of Joseph McCarthy in the 1950s. Likewise, the anti-critical race theory politicians of today that do the bidding for white minority rule and racial discrimination are very much the same as John C. Calhoun fronting for the rich plantation owners during the antebellum South. The primary differences between the not-so-distant past of the last 75 years and the present have to do with the disbursements of the accumulation of capital. From post-World War II until around 1974, the United States experienced close to 3 decades of unparalleled upward social mobility, as well as a rapidly expanding middle class. However, since the mid-1970s to 2022, there's been a steady increase in economic inequality, a shrinking middle class, and downward social mobility for many. Thus, the contemporary bipartisan erosion of the liberal capitalist consensus in the United States is not the primary cause of our present democratic crisis, but it is rather symptomatic of a much broader problem that neither the Republicans, as a whole, nor most of the Democrats are willing to accept. The book, Continuing, I'm referring to the inability of our bourgeois democratic system to resolve the contradictions of a political economy that promises the American dream to one and all and yet caters to the richest 1% and provides suitably for the upper 10%. In other words, our country's present-day conflicts over identity politics, government failures, neoliberal policies, right-wing intransigencies, and climate change not only predate Donald Trump and Trumpism, but they are all fundamentally driven by the unrelenting and expanding political economy of structural inequality. What makes this Trump book different from the others is that it is the only one grounded in the scientific study of crime and social control. Criminology focuses on the pathology of harmful acts and the cultural construction of both crime and punishment. The book is Criminology on Trump by Greg Barack. Greg Barack, by the way, is an expert in criminology.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Hey, Wabbits. It's the first day of the new month. Well, the first business day of the new month. It's actually October 3rd, but happy Monday to you. A lot going on in the world, as you might have noticed. We will be talking about as we continue through the program. Nearly 2/3 of 1 million Americans, Floridians, are still without power. A sad testimonial to the state of our grid-based, kind of hub and spoke, mostly based on fossil fuel power system. However, there was one community in Florida, just 12 miles northeast of Fort Myers, which got wiped out. This community, however, didn't lose a single house and didn't lose power, didn't lose electricity, didn't get flooded. Yeah, well, their streets got flooded. Their houses didn't. There's a story there, too. And right now, their community center and their public school are, sheltering people from nearby Fort Myers and other communities. What's the deal with Babcock Ranch? I'll tell you about that in just a moment. Also, why did Ron DeSantis wait to respond to the hurricane? Well, this is a question a hell of a lot of Republicans in Florida. A lot of people in Florida are now saying, what? He knew on Sunday this was going to hit us this hard, and he waited until Tuesday to issue a mandatory evacuation order? And then finally, how far will the Supreme Court have to go before Congress finally says, okay, you guys, that's enough. We're onto your game. No more. We're going to change the dynamic here. Congress has the power to do this. What's it going to take? I have some theories. We'll talk about all those things in the first hour. In the second hour of the program, Michael Cohen is going to drop by. I wanted to talk to him about what it's like being the consigliere for a mob family, basically. I find this absolutely fascinating, and I think it's one of the aspects of the whole Trump presidency for which there is not anything close to an appropriate amount of discussion. We'll talk about that. Also, how OPEC is planning to manipulate our midterms. Yeah, Russia and Saudi Arabia specifically. I'll tell you about that in the second hour of the program. We have evidence. Actually, it's going to happen on Wednesday of this week. I'll tell you all about that in the second hour. And is Liz Truss backing down? She's just said she's going to, postpone her doing away with the top tax bracket in the UK. And the markets seem to have responded favorably. But there's a few other programs she doesn't seem to be backing down on. We'll do a deep dive into that in the second hour, at the end of the second hour of the program, or in the second hour, in the second block of the first half of the second hour. And in our third hour, the Kremlin, Carlson, Fox, Russian news feedback conspiracy loop exposed. This is an amazing story. And I have a geeky science for you. Can hugs save you or heal you from a heart attack? Seriously. It has to do with this magical chemical called oxytocin. But let's start out. Why Babcock Ranch survived Hurricane Ian, but other Florida cities didn't. And this is pretty breathtaking. First of all, you've got this story that Governor DeSantis was informed on Sunday that the hurricane was going to produce this kind of damage, but he waited Sunday, he waited Monday, and finally on Tuesday, he ordered an evacuation. And by that point in time, it was too late for most people to get out. And, so now they're finding bodies all over the place. But there's another story, and that's kind of a sad, not kind of sad, that's a tragic story. But there's another good news story out of Florida, and it's about this little town 12 miles northeast of Fort Myers. Fort Myers, of course, got wiped out. Many dead, total loss of power, total loss of water, other utilities. But this community came through the hurricane just fine. They never even lost power. What's the deal here? Babcock Farms was started in 2015 as a 100% solar community. They have over 700,000 solar panels that produce so much electricity that this community of 2,000 homes, and that's, the size of a small city, right? This community of 2,000 homes, or the small town anyway, never lost electricity, never lost their lights, and they still have plenty of electricity. This started in 2015, and the guys who got together to do this, the people who got together to create Babcock Farms, were not a bunch of old hippies looking for, hey, let's live off the grid. The solar farm, in fact, that largely powers their community was built by Florida Power and Light in a joint public-private partnership. And this is an area that regularly votes red, votes Republican. They are not save the world hippies. What they are people who recognize that in 1970, solar power was $80 a watt. In 2010, it was $6 a watt to install. The panels were around $2 a watt. And today, solar power costs, it was $6 a watt then. Today, it's around $1.40 a watt, and the panels themselves are 38 cents a watt. That's a big drop. Solar and wind are now the cheapest way to produce electricity in the United States, bar none, which is why 250,000 Americans today earn their living designing and maintaining and installing solar power. And Babcock Ranch did this. Their homes have solar roofs. Their community has a giant solar farm. They also, they built planning for the flood, which we just got. They built with the streets are lower than the houses. Typically your house is just a little bit above the street. Well, here they're substantially above the streets. And the streets were designed specifically to flood. They were intended to flood, and thus the streets, drained right into a drainage system that ultimately led back out to the ocean. This is called resilience. And as Florida is looking at the need to either build back hundreds of thousands, or at least certainly tens of thousands of homes, perhaps hundreds of thousands, and definitely, build new housing for for people who have been displaced, Florida should be looking at this. Now, this is not a brand new idea, this idea of, solarizing communities. Back in 2009, I was a speaker in Barcelona, Spain, along with Hermann Scheer. Hermann Scheer was a member of the German parliament, and he had introduced what was called the 100,000 rooftop program. And it was a really simple program. Basically, what the deal was the power companies in Germany needed to build a new power plant. But they didn't want to build nuclear power plants because Chernobyl had just melted down, and everybody in Germany, this was back in the 80s, everybody in Germany was horrified. And so Hermann Scheer came up with this plan where if you owned a home, the bank would loan you enough money to solarize your house at a very, very low interest rate. And these bank loans would be backstopped by the government. So there was no risk to the banks, so they could offer a low interest rate. The utility, instead of having to spend hundreds of millions of dollars building a whole new plant, would instead, for the period of time that you had that loan on your solar roof, would pay you for the electricity you were feeding into the grid enough money to cover your monthly payments. So the utility is basically helping pay people to put solar on their roofs so that they don't have to build another nuclear power plant. It's actually cheaper than building a power plant. Everybody wins. All the risk is taken by the government, but the government is not having to shell out large quantities of money up front. It's just they're just taking the risk. This is being done by the banks and the utility companies. And sure enough, his 100,000 rooftop program has turned into over 1 million solar roofs. In fact, they had to upgrade their electric grid recently to deal with this incredible surge in electricity coming from solar houses. There was a couple of weeks this last summer where 100% of the electricity in Germany was provided by this program. 100%. The trains, the planes, well, not the planes, the trains, the buses, the subways, the trams above ground, everything. We can do this here. In fact, MIT noted that Germany avoided pumping 74 million metric tons of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere just in 2009, and they created 300,000 new jobs. We need to build a resilient America. We need to start with Puerto Rico and Florida, and we can start right now. This is not rocket science. This is fully modern, fully developed, right here, right now. You can buy it off the shelf technology that every community in America could be using to harden themselves and get off their dependence on their local utility. Or do it cooperatively, like they did at Babcock Farms, with the local utility. It worked.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
So why did DeSantis wait to respond? And what are we going to do about the Supreme Court? We'll talk about those stories in just a moment. And welcome back, Jim in Babcock Ranch, Florida, of all places. Hey, Jim, your ears must have been ringing or itching or whatever the phrase is, burning, I guess.
Tom.
Hey, what's up, Jim?
Yeah, hey, Tom, how are you doing? I'm watching you, of course. It's interesting. I've been watching you for a number of years, and I appreciate everything you do. I live in Babcock Ranch, have been here since 2018. Where I moved from in South Fort Myers. Mm-hmm. Those folks where I lived before were under 3-4 feet of water. And we're happy to have moved to where we are because it is a nice place to live, just like you've mentioned. And everything, we were here for the whole hurricane. And I would say that we caught the eye wall because we had trees were blowing one way for most of the hurricane, and then all of a sudden the eye wall passes and it goes the other way.
Right.
It was amazing.
So you sustained a direct hit, and your community's intact.
Right. It is intact. My daughter and son-in-law were on Sanibel. They went back there to take care of some hurricane problems after they brought the father over to the hospital, and they couldn't get back off the island. So they had to hunker down there and wait for, at least 12 feet of water coming through.
Wow.
At least, maybe more.
Wow.
Maybe more. But anyway, they're with us now, safe. And that's great. One of the things that I wanted to bring up had concern with how FPL treats, let's say, my home with how they limit the amount.
This is Florida Power and Light.
Solar panels I can have. Florida
Right.
Power and Light. They limit the amount of solar panels I can have because they don't want to pay anymore.
Right. They want you to buy solar electricity from their 700,000 panel solar farm that's right next to your community, right?
Oh, absolutely. And the nice part is it is inside the original Babcock Ranch of 91,000 acres. So it is about 2 miles up the road from us.
Right. But they're still playing games with you. Surprise, surprise.
Yeah, surprise, surprise. But it works well, and although we do pay FPL, for our electricity,
right,
direct to it. But it's a shame that all the houses down here don't have panels also.
Right. I understand also that your houses were built mostly one story, fairly low wind profile, so that they wouldn't get blown away by a hurricane. Do I have that right?
Well,
or at least they're built.
There are a number of two-story. Well, there are a number of 2 stories here, and on my particular street, there are no 2 stories. So, but generally,
But the
one
construction
story
was literally designed to withstand hurricanes.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely, and everybody has done well. We had hurricane windows. They were installed. That's how we bought the house. We wanted it that way. And let me tell you, those They had 144-mile winds at the fire department just a mile away.
Wow.
So,
wow. And you came through it just fine. See, this is such a model. It's not like this is a fantasy. There you are living there. Jim, it's great talking with you. Thank you so much for the call, and thanks for validating my premise. I appreciate it. It's great to hear from you. It's 20 minutes past the hour. Missed my opening rant today? It's usually published over at HartmannReport.com, where you can read it and share it with your friends for free. Check it out, HartmannReport.com. Back in 1981, the first year of the Reagan presidency, one of our two senators from Oregon here, Mark Hatfield, wrote an op-ed for the Oregon Territory newspaper about the new right, about this whole movement that had seized the Republican Party. And in it, he called them out for escalating nuclear arms, for opposing the Equal Rights Amendment, for opposing abortion, for supporting school prayer, and for their argument that if you weren't on their side, you were not patriotic. He also goes into a long rant about how they're exploiting religion for political purposes, and he thinks it's damaging Christianity as well as America. And then finally he says, finally, persistent threats of racism lie directly below the surface of new right ideology. And then he goes into this whole rant about that. It's really extraordinary how, what Reagan was doing is coming back into vogue. I got a whole video about the whole thing over at ThomHartmann.com. Check it out. And we're welcome back. Okay, so Ron DeSantis, this is interesting. The Attorney General candidate, the Democrat running for Attorney General, Daniel Uhlfelder, has basically spent this last weekend warning people about Ron DeSantis, about what DeSantis was up to. DeSantis, it turns out, knew where the storm was heading as early as Sunday and knew how bad it was going to be and did nothing. And, now that the Attorney General candidate, this Democrat, has pointed this out, DeSantis is going, oh, nobody thought it was going to hit Lee County. Yes, they did. Oh, it wasn't even in the cone for Lee County. No, he was lying through his teeth. So here we have DeSantis trying to pull a Trump. He's literally lying about where the hurricane was going in an effort to say, well, no, I just, postponed and procrastinated because, I don't know, we had serious things to attend to. I had to come up with another tranche of immigrants in Texas that we could ship to Martha's Vineyard, Well, obviously he didn't say all those things, but Uhlfelder, this is the Democrat running for AG, posted a screen capture of the Lee County government's Twitter account showing the mandatory evacuations for areas near the canals and on the coast, but the governor didn't back it up. Uhlfelder explained that Fort Myers is a low-lying city, and ahead of the storm, they were predicting anywhere from 9 to 12-foot storm surges, which would reasonably swallow one-story homes across the area, and they did. So here you had the county saying, get the hell out, but a lot of people, hey, it's just the county, the state hasn't said anything, the governor hasn't said anything. Ron DeSantis is our boy. He's the one who, knows what's going on. He's the guy who tells us what to do. And DeSantis didn't say anything, so we're just going to stay here. And then Tuesday comes, oh my God, get out of the way. And suddenly people don't have gas in their cars and the roads are jammed. And in fact, there were several roads where people were caught in their cars as the water came up above their cars. And all of this goes to Ron DeSantis. The other big story that I think is worth talking about here is the Supreme Court. A remarkable piece over at Alternet by Alex Henderson. It's titled, Shaken Law Professors Revolt as Hyperpartisan SCOTUS Rulings Upend Constitutional Principles. Elena Kagan recently gave a speech where she talked about how the Supreme Court has ceased to be a court, essentially, and has become an arm of the GOP, of the Republican Party, ideologically. It's become a political arm. And, for generations, the Supreme Court's main job was to uphold civil liberties. Or at least that's what they did. That's what they perceived as their main job. But then, they struck down abortion rights, one of the civil liberties afforded largely to women. And then Clarence Thomas, Ginny's husband, right-wing conspiracy nut crackpot, in his ruling on Dobbs, said, we really ought to consider Griswold, Lawrence, and Obergefell. Griswold, of course, is Griswold, Lawrence, and Obergefell, basically. Griswold said it's legal for you to have birth control. This was in 1965, Griswold versus Connecticut. And in that case, a Connecticut couple, a married couple, sued at the Supreme Court to overturn a Virginia law that said that it was a felony for anybody in Virginia to have birth control, including condoms. See, this is where the GOP is going, is these extreme Catholic laws. And, Griswold overturned that. And then in 1972, the Supreme Court legalized condoms for single people. In Lawrence v. Kansas, the Supreme Court legalized simply having gay relationships, sexual relationships. And in Obergefell, the Supreme Court legalized gay marriage. Now, the one thing that Thomas didn't point out was Loving versus Virginia, which legalized interracial marriage, maybe because that would gore his particular ox. But now we've got this situation where all across America, law school professors are freaking out because they can't teach constitutional law anymore because the Supreme Court is no longer following the Constitution. They're instead following the dictates of a political party and of Donald Trump. You've got this Tiffany Jeffers, a professor at Georgetown University. She said, it's hard to think about your own profession, the things you were taught, the things you believed in abruptly coming to an end. It's hard to ask a law professor to dismantle all the training they've had. It's difficult, emotional, psychological transformation. It's not easy to upend your life's work and no longer trust the Supreme Court. Another professor at Duke Law School, same thing. I've always perceived the court as a tool for justice. It's honestly hard to know what to say to students entering this profession right now. So what's it going to take before the court gets over?
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
I personally think that this fall we're going to see, and next spring, we're going to see the court gutting civil rights and voting rights, and that might be enough to cause Congress to say, okay, 13 people now. Our book today in the Thom Hartmann Book Club is The Recurring Crises of American Democracy, 4 Threats. I think 4 Threats is the actual title, by Susan Bettler and Robert C. Lieberman. And this is from my well-dog-eared copy. I have read this book cover to cover. It's an amazing book. This is from the introduction. When the president used his power to target immigrants, the press, and his political opponents, the sheer overreach of his actions shocked many citizens. Tensions among the nation's political leaders had been escalating for years. Embroiled in one intense conflict after another, both sides had grown increasingly distrustful of each other. Every action by one camp provoked a greater counter-reaction from the other, sometimes straining the limits of the Constitution. Fights and mob violence followed. Leaders of the dominant party grew convinced that their only hope for fixing the government was to do everything possible to weaken their opponents and silence dissent. The president signed into law provisions that made it more difficult for immigrants, who tended to support the opposition, to attain citizenship, and mandated the deportation of those who were deemed dangerous or who came from, quote, hostile, end quote, nations. He then put his pen to a law that would allow for the prosecution of those who openly criticized his administration, such as newspaper publishers. The year just described was not 2017 or 2018. Rather, it was 1798, when President John Adams signed the Alien and Sedition Act. His allies in Congress, the Federalists, argued that these measures were necessary in anticipation of a possible war with France to protect the country from internal spies, subversive elements, and dissent. The Federalists disapproved of immigrants, viewing them as a threat to the purity of our national character. They particularly disliked the Irish, the largest immigrant group, because they largely favored their political opponents, the Republicans, and sympathized with the French. Or as one Federalist congressman put it, there was no need to, quote, invite hordes of wild Irishmen, nor the turbulent and disorderly of all the world to come here with a basic view to distract our tranquility, end quote. Critics of the new laws raised their voices in protest. The Republicans charged that they amounted to barefaced efforts to weaken their faction, which happened to include most Americans not of English heritage. Two leading Republicans, Thomas Jefferson and James Madison, went so far as to advise state governments to refuse to abide by the Sedition Act, resolving that it was unconstitutional. Political conflicts boiled over into everyday life. Federalists and Republicans often resided in different neighborhoods and attended different churches. Federalists, centered particularly in New England, prized their Anglo-American identity, and even after the Revolution, they retained their affinity for their mother country. Republicans saw themselves as cosmopolitan, cherishing Enlightenment ideals of liberty and equality, and they championed the French Revolution and held disdain for Britain. By 1794, partisans in urban communities were holding separate 4th of July ceremonies. Republicans read aloud the Declaration of Independence, penned by the founder of their party, Thomas Jefferson, as evidence that independence had been their own achievement, while the Federalists offered toasts to their leader, President George Washington. The Republicans viewed themselves as the party of the people. One prominent politician among them chided the Federalists for celebrating not, quote, we the people, but, quote, we the noble, chosen, privileged few, end quote. To many people at the time, the Alien and Sedition Acts bore an unsettling resemblance to the kind of government overreach that spurred them to fight a war for independence just a few decades earlier. The acts comprised 4 laws, 3 of which placed restrictions on immigrants and appeared to be a strategic attempt to shape the electorate by excluding potential voters for the opposition in order to tip the scales of power. The 4th, the Sedition Act, made it illegal to publish, quote, any false, scandalous, and malicious writing or writings against the government of the United States or either House of Congress of the United States with intent to defame or to bring them into contempt or disrepute, end quote. By denying freedom of speech and freedom of the press, it outlawed criticism of the government and deprived citizens of the opportunity to become more fully informed by hearing alternative points of view. The measures gave the president power to exert control over Americans' lives in ways removed from congressional authority and therefore less accountable to popular control. Some state governments outright refused to abide by the new federal law, intensifying divisions. And on the streets, mock violence, the burning of effigies, was swiftly transformed into the genuine article as politically motivated beatings and open brawls proliferated. In one case, on July 27, 1798, Federalists in New York marched up Broadway singing God Save the King just to antagonize the Republicans. The latter responded by singing French Revolutionary songs. Soon the singing contest gave way to violence as fighting ensued. Watching the growing chaos and divisions, Americans of all stripes worried that their experiment in self-government might not survive the decade. They feared that monarchy would reassert itself, aristocracy would replace representative government, or some states might secede from the Union, causing its demise. The early beginnings of democracy in the United States were fragile, even at a time when some of the Constitution's framers themselves held public office. The book, 4 Threats, by Mettler and Lieberman. Our 1-hour free podcast recaps our show, and it's available wherever fine podcasts are found. And we have the full 3-hour podcast available over at thomhartmann.com if you want to really support our program. Welcome back. Picking up your phone calls. Pat in Flossmoor, Illinois. Hey, Pat, what's on your mind today?
Hi, Tom. I was calling because I hope the Democrats can get ahead of the crisis that the Republicans are predicting. You know, like we'll never see this kind of thing again. Do they have the National Guard, the Democrats, on standby? Also, the polling places, like DeSantis has a private army, which he's going to send out to the polling places to make sure that things are fair. We need to have the National Guard there to make sure that that doesn't happen. And here in Illinois, I live outside of Chicago. This is a blue state, but they're closing 40% of the polling places in the city of Chicago. I'd like to see buses do a round robin going from where those.
Now, this is a democratically controlled state, Pat. Might it be that they're closing the polling places because so many people are opting to vote by mail?
No, because a lot of them are in the inner city. So I don't think those folks are mailing stuff in. But I'd like to see buses going round robin from the closed polling place to an open one, and that's nationwide. All day long, they could have a series of buses just going, picking up people, dropping them off, so that they could get to the polling places. Yeah. And lastly, I'd like to see them get rid of DeJoy, because he's over the post office.
Yeah, welcome.
We have one lady that, Lauren Underwood, and she always wins by mail-in vote. Now, if they can't get him out so that they can get this mail through in a timely fashion, she could lose.
Yeah.
So I'm hoping that the Democrats wake up and smell the coffee. Don't wait until there's a riot and people breaking into the Capitol to say, oh, my, we're in trouble. You know, they're telling you what they're going to do.
Yeah, no, I agree. We have an ongoing attempted fascist coup in the United States. It has not backed off. It has not slowed down. It suffered a setback on January 6th, but they've turned that into an organizing opportunity. So it's a time that we all need to be paying attention and we all need to be active. Pat, thank you very much. Well said. Brenda in Springfield, Ohio. Hey, Brenda, what's on your mind today?
Hey, Tom. How are you?
I'm well. What's up?
That's good. I'm calling about the putting solar on top of my roof. I looked at it here in Ohio, and it was going to be, for 25 years loan for $30,607. It was a great interest rate, 2.99%, but I just couldn't afford that. I mean, I'm 68 now. I live on, my Social Security and a little bit of a retirement income from the Air Force, and I had to turn it down. Yeah. As much as I wanted to go green, I am with a carrier here in Ohio that's supposedly giving me clean energy, but I'm paying a little bit of a higher rate than
same here in Portland. Well, this is a reality that many older people are facing, Brenda, which is that it typically takes about at least a decade for a solar system to pay for itself, depending on how large it is and how much it reduces your electric bills on a monthly basis. So, Louise and I looked at solarizing our house. The big problem we had is that we don't have a south-facing roof. We've got it's a whole long story, but it just, the house isn't appropriate for it, sadly. But had we done it, then, really the benefits would be 20, 30 years down the road, or at least 20 years down the road, when probably we will not be in that house if we're even still on this earth. So, this is a challenge. On the other hand, stepping into this space now, and you might want to look around for this, there are companies that will come out and install solar on your house, and they own it, and they basically become your utility instead of your local power company. They install the solar on your house. They charge you a monthly fee, which is typically a little less, 10, 20, sometimes 30% less than what you're paying for electricity right now. But you're still paying them because they own all your solar equipment. But you're paying less than you are right now, and electric bills are, from these companies that are using fossil fuels are only going to go up over time. That's certainly been the historic trend. And so it's a good way to get solar and lock in the benefits. And then at the end of the lifetime of the solar system, at the end of 10 or 20 years, typically, just like when you lease a car, there's a buyout and you can buy the system for pennies on the dollar. So that's something to look at, Brenda. I don't know what might be available in your part of Ohio, but I do know that kind of thing is popping up all over the country. Brenda, thank you for the call. Fernando in Tampa, Florida. Hey, Fernando, thanks for listening to WMNF. What's on your mind?
Hey, Tom. Thanks for having my call. I just want to say thank you for your work. I'm glad to be back and be able to listen to you on this Monday after the hurricane. I was in Tampa. I evacuated safely to Central Florida, and luckily everything was fine. But I know a lot of people in Fort Myers. I have family in Fort Myers that are going through horrible stuff, and specifically my sister. she's a school teacher, and I just wanted to bring attention to the difference in the response where Hillsborough County here in Tampa versus the Fort Myers, Lee County. And there's a lot of people upset, specifically, for example, on Monday, everybody evacuated the previous Monday, a week ago, from Tampa. The city of Tampa did mandatory zoning evacuations, whereas Lee County, my sister, a teacher, was forced, just like most people do, show up to work on Monday, expecting that the hurricane was going to be closer towards Tampa.
Wow.
So I just wanted to bring that up in attention because somebody ought to be held responsible.
Yeah, like Ron DeSantis. Is your sister's okay, Fernando?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
She was stuck there. I let her stay at my house here for the past few days, but she just went back there and everything. It's a disaster zone out there. So.
Oh, man. Sad. It's so sad. Well, it is a rebuilding opportunity, but it's difficult to look at the possible upside of really, really bad events when they're happening. I totally get it. Fernando, I'm so sorry to hear about your sister. And thank you for calling in, and thanks for checking in with us. It's nice to hear that you're doing well. Lou in Pueblo, Colorado. Hey, Lou, what's on your mind today?
Hey, I got a comment on the Supreme Court. I think I have an answer. I did some research back to 1950. And let's look at unanimous decisions. Generally, we all support unanimous decisions. The Warrenberger Court and the Earl Warren Court averaged 50 unanimous decisions a year, or they were both in for 16, 17 years. This court, the Kremlin Court, has been averaging about 20, but since they put in those unqualified felons, they're up to 300 unanimous decisions a year. The reason for that, it cranks up. There's a thing that the legal people look at, how many yes votes versus no, and it cranks up that percentage. Well, generally we agree with unanimous decisions. We know Congress won't do anything unless they're bribed or they gain power. Well, if we were to require all decisions to be unanimous, Congress gains power. And they both gain power, so I think they might support it.
Congress could make that. Congress could change that rule. They could change. Right now, the threshold for a majority opinion with the Supreme Court is 50% plus one. And there's an odd number of people on the court. 9 people on the court, so that's basically 5 people. Congress could very easily say it's got to be 2/3. Which would be 6 or 7, I guess. I have to do the math on that. I don't know which.
Make it unanimous.
Or unanimous, yeah. Make it a consensus court. And I have. I was going to say I have no problem with that. I'm thinking of.
Well,
go ahead.
Take a look, Tom, at the unanimous decisions. I read about 20 or 30 of them. I totally agreed with every one of them. I don't think you'd find anyone. In the unanimous decisions, they're actually doing what the Constitution says they're supposed to do. Right. That's the only time they do it.
Right. Yeah. It's an interesting question, Lou, because there's a bunch of different ways that Congress can regulate the court. And of course, Article 3, Section 2 simply says, the court shall operate under regulations specified by Congress. Typically the way that they've regulated the court is setting the court's budget, setting the number of people on the court, that sort of thing. But they certainly could say, you must have, if it was unanimous, you could have one person who just constantly blows up the court. Like Clarence Thomas, he was the one guy who voted not to force Donald Trump to turn over documents to the federal government, because of course those documents might have included stuff about his wife. But you could have basically one troll blowing up everything. I do think though that a supermajority, that would be a smaller change to the court, one that most Americans wouldn't even understand the consequences of. I don't think it would be a huge explosive political event like raising the number of justices to the court to 11 or 13, which is frankly what I think they should do.
But you can't take away power from either political party, or you will never get any support in Congress. They have to either be bribed. They have to be bribed with either money or power. This way increases both parties' power by limiting the Supreme Court, so it actually gets support.
Yeah, it may well. It may well. And I would add that I think the other thing that will provoke a change in the court, and has in the past, is the public being outraged. This is what happened after after Dred
1800?
Scott. Yeah, after 1856, Dred Scott, when Chief Justice Roger Taney said, Taney said, black people are the property of white people everywhere in the country. And Abraham Lincoln just said, I'm going to ignore that decision except for poor Mr. Dred Scott. He's got to go along with it, which I think was the right answer. Lou, I got to run, but thank you for the call. So what's it going to take for Americans to rise up against the court?
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit thomhartmann.com for audio and video archives.
It's happened 3 times by 2 presidents in the past, but I'm not holding my breath right now. I do think, though, that more of these wackadoodle decisions, and you're going to see a lot more pressure. And welcome back. Tyrone in Harlem, New York. Hey, Tyrone, thanks for watching us on YouTube. What's on your mind today?
Thanks for taking my call, Tom. Yeah, I like you said, expanding the court. I was watching this CNN special about the court and about what Theodore Roosevelt had to threaten to be able to have the justices recognize that they were on the wrong path. Because he threatened to expand the court to 15, and they knew he wasn't playing. But our problem is, it seems that we got to have the hands around our throat before they realize that they're trying to kill us. Because these people, they already expressed that they're going after birth control, they're going after the LGBTQ, they're going after the stuff that they're saying that don't specifically say. The Supreme Court, the Constitution don't specifically say this is what we're here to protect. We're going to try to take that away. I won't be surprised if they try to bring back fugitive slave act or some most craziness.
Well, I think the most dangerous thing they're going to do, Tyrone, is they're going to try and make it easy to sue journalists. They're going to make it, and they're going to make it easy for government to regulate news. This is what fascist governments always do. It's one of their first steps, and this court is a fascist court.
So only way we can get out of it is by extend the court. Expand the court, because I don't see any other way around this. Because these people don't see, they're not going to see the light, or have an epiphany and say, oh, no, we were going down the wrong path. That is not going to happen. We can throw that out the window. And until we realize what we're up against and recognize that these people mean business and they mean to send us back to the 1950s or 40s, when this country was so-called great, when only a certain amount of people had rights to do whatever they want to do when they want to do it, we're going to continue down this road of self-destruction.
Yeah.
Because this is where we're going.
Yep, I'm with you. Tyrone, thank you. Spot on. Patty in Columbus, Ohio. Patty, what's up?
Hi, Tom. How are you doing, sir?
I'm well. What's up?
I know 4 states that have stolen money from the COVID relief fund for their projects. I was wondering why neither the House or Senate, the Judiciary Committee, or the Justice Department have done anything about it.
Well, I'm not sure that the Justice Department isn't. I mean, there are a lot of investigations going on right now into fraud around, particularly the PPP program. These programs that were put into place during the Trump administration were just basically open invitations for fraud. The New York Times did a great piece last week on their daily podcast where they just went through the details of it, and it was just amazing. I mean, there's literally hundreds of thousands of fraudulent applications with people who got money. Everything from 10 grand to multi-millions of dollars, including members of Congress. A lot of Republican members of Congress were in line, had their hands out, and many of them got lots of money.
Our governor, Mike Wine, took $200 million and gave it to law enforcement.
Right. And you think that was inappropriately appropriated?
Yes.
Or inappropriately spent? Yeah.
Yes.
So, I can't speak to that. I don't know the details of it, Patty, but I do know that the program was a mess, the way it got put together. And hopefully they can clean it up. Patty, I got to run, but thank you for the call. And thanks for watching us on Facebook Live. We'll be right back. It is 49 minutes past the hour. I have a new book out. It's called The Hidden History of Neoliberalism, How Reaganism Gutted America and How to Restore Its Greatness. Greg Palast calls it a hand grenade of a book. You can pick it up wherever fine books are available. Tag you're it. Welcome back. 10 minutes before the hour. And Mike in Chicago. Hey, Mike, what's on your mind today?
Hey, Tom. If I got a question, if justice is supposed to be equal under the law, then why are we approaching the 2-month anniversary since the Mar-a-Lago search? And neither the FBI nor the DOJ has brought Trump in for questioning. And now over the weekend with the National Archives stating that there's still more missing documents, and Trump's lived at Bedminster since June, and yet they have not gone over there and searched that place. It's like It's beyond infuriating.
Right, when we saw them moving the documents from Mar-a-Lago to Bedminster on that private plane, I mean, there's video of it all over the internet. I'm with you, Mike. I mean, you know, the Department of Justice building in Washington, D.C. literally has equal justice under the law carved over the mantle of their door, if I'm remembering correctly. And yet we've always known from the founding of the Republic that if you're wealthy, if you're white, if you're male, if you have political or business connections to wealthy, powerful people, there is a completely different set of justice and standard of justice for you than there is for everybody else. Jeffrey Epstein was probably the most corrupt example of that, but we're seeing the same thing with Donald Trump.
And with the 48 empty classified folders, that doesn't even appear on the news anymore. That should be worrying everyone, you know?
I'm with you. I'm with you. And the question is, who did he give this stuff to? How badly have we been compromised? And you know, what's the consequence of it going to be? And you know, I believe the Justice Department is now starting to seriously look into this stuff. But, you know, it can't come fast enough at all, for me anyway. Thank you very much for the call. Rob in Eastern North Carolina. Hey, Rob, what's up?
Hey, how you doing, Tom? I really appreciate your intellectual openness to, you know, discussion of political ideas, which is we need more of this nowadays. Look, I agree with you on the justice system. I had a first cousin that was a district attorney here in in North Carolina for 2 terms. Mm-hmm. And it's like when you get your car worked on or you go to the doctor, when you get the level of expertise that you can afford in a lawyer, and a court-appointed lawyer does not normally have the same kind of expertise as a more specialized lawyer you can go to. But I had a question about our energy policies here in the United States. My family goes way back with my father was a Ford Lincoln Mercury dealer, and I worked for Ford. And look, the automobile manufacturers in the United States, Tom, have been producing all-electric cars for 20 years, and people vote with their dollars when they buy a product of a car, just like they vote, you know, for the politicians they want when we have elections. There's never been a general acceptance of EV cars or trucks in the in the market. It's never been above 2.5–3%, and most people don't realize that. You have to replace the batteries, lithium battery packs, about every 9 to 10 years. And you can go into a registered Chevrolet dealer with a Volt when you have to do that after about 10 or 11 years. And they can charge you, it costs sometimes up to $15,000 to $18,000 to $20,000.
Try $4,000 or $5,000.
Now, another thing, well,
that's what those batteries are selling for now. Yeah, no, the batteries are the battery packs are $3,000 to $4,000 plus installation.
Okay,
but that's not what you call it, Rob.
Say I had a magic wand, Tom, and I could wave it, and 50% of the people in the United States tomorrow will wake up with an EV in their driveway. Now, what do you think would happen in 2 days when they plug them in to charge them? First thing would do is the infrastructure, the grid, so-called electric grid in the United States would melt down, and then it would go.
Not even remotely true, Rob.
No, that is true.
No, it's not even remotely true. An electric vehicle.
We have enough
electric
energy
vehicle
under our feet in the United States that if we opened up ANWR and we had permitting like it was
Rob,
3 years ago,
this is nonsense. What you're
prices would, now,
Rob, hold your breath for just a second, and let me just explain to you the science of this. An electric vehicle, if you plug it in with a 110-volt charger like I use at home, is drawing the amount of electricity of a hairdryer. And if everybody in the country turned on a hairdryer for 4 or 5 hours to the equivalent to charge their car, or overnight when there's an abundant amount of cheap electricity, it would not cause any kind of crisis to our electric grid. So, number one, your point is just simply wrong. Back to you, Rob.
He's going to blackmail Europe and EU. If we go back temporarily on a wartime footing and produce energy, we could send it to Europe and save them, and we could help stop this terrible war that's going on in Ukraine. I don't care what you think about your opinion, left, right, or center. That is the truth. And you have a nice day. I appreciate you taking my call.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much, Rob. Tom in Arlington Heights, Illinois. Hey, Tom, what's up?
Hey, Tom, I was calling about the woman who had called earlier about recommendations for solar, and I'm a recent recipient. I live in Northern Illinois. I have bought solar panels in 2019. I chose to buy them because when I looked at return on investment, in my particular case, and I do have a south-facing part of the roof, my return on investment for the price of my house, the value of my house, I got back in about 2 years.
Wow.
Because I own, and it was considered to be a benefit because
the solar panels increase the value of your house in addition to reducing your electric bill.
Right now, but if you rent them, like you were suggesting, which is something my brother did, the negative aspect of that is that you don't get all the financial benefits from the rebates and things like that, right. But also it becomes a liability if you choose to sell the house. If you live in a house for the length of the time that they have to be up there, which I think the contract is 15 years, depending on the company. Like I was looking at the one from Sunrun, which is one of the companies that are up there. So in that case, it becomes a financial liability.
Why? Because you'd be selling the house with a cheaper electric system than the power company coming off the grid. Why would it be a liability?
You're also obligated to produce a certain amount of electricity when they lease. They expect a certain return on their investment, so they're expected for so many kilowatt hours be generated over the course of the year.
Right.
Even with mine that I own, I mean, one of the things that I was able to do when I got mine, and this is just ballpark, the system cost just under $30,000 to install, and I was able to get roughly 1/3 of it back through federal tax credits. And there's also get about another third back because in Illinois they have what's called solar renewable energy credits, and I can sell those. But I'm
that's great.
To produce.
That's great. So Tom, I got to run. I'm sorry, we're out of time here. But thank you for the call and thanks for the update on that. We need to do this nationwide. We really do. We'll be right back.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann.
In addition to bringing you the Thom Hartmann Program here on Free Speech TV and Video Media Online, we also have a whole set of ways you can interact with us and tools you can use to spread the word about the importance of democracy and the threats to it in our republic. First, there's your daily homework. Sue Nethercutt puts together a daily email newsletter that has a link to every story I discuss on the air, so you can find my sources and you can share them with your friends. It's free and you can sign up at thomhartmann.com. Second, I publish my daily take every day over at the HartmannReport.com website. That's also free if you want the daily 5 days a week rant in your inbox. No ads either. Third, we have the podcasts. There's the free 1-hour version of our daily show that's advertising supported. You can find that wherever you get your podcasts normally. And then there's also the podcast of the entire 3-hour show with no advertisements, and that's available by subscription over at thomhartmann.com. So check them all out at thomhartmann.com and hartmannreport.com.
We say fight back!
Our book in the Thom Hartmann Book Club is The Cabinet, George Washington and the Creation of an American Institution by Leslie M. Chervinsky. This is from the introduction. At 11:30 in the morning on August 22nd, 1789, a large cream-colored coach pulled up to the front door of Federal Hall 26 Wall Street in New York City. 6 matching, perfectly groomed horses pulled the elegant carriage with sparkling gold trim. The coachman, outfitted in crisp white and red trimmed livery, jumped down from the back of the carriage and opened the door. An elegantly dressed man with powdered hair stepped down with a portfolio of papers under his arm. He towered over his companion, Henry Knox, the acting Secretary of War, and his slaves attending to the horses. His ornate coach and his imposing presence drew curious stares from strangers passing by on the street. He walked up to the front door of Federal Hall and was immediately announced. George Washington, the first president of the United States, had arrived for his first visit to the United States Senate. This was no ordinary meeting. 2 years earlier, the delegates at the Constitutional Convention in Philadelphia had agreed that the Senate would advise and consent on treaties and other questions of foreign policy. But in practice, how the president and the Senate would interact remained for the first office holders to work out. Washington's relationship with the Senate was just one of countless governing details that he had to establish as the first president. Establishing precedent for every presidential action consumed his thoughts in the first few years of his administration. Not only would the American public and international audience judge his every action, but his successors would be guided by his choices. The stakes could not have been higher. The future of the Republic rested on Washington making the right decisions. He approached every new situation with caution and took action only after consulting with his advisors. His first visit to the Senate was no different. The tense relationship between Native American nations and the United States posed an immediate challenge after Washington's inauguration on April 30th, 1789. Most Native American nations had sided with the British during the Revolutionary War, recognizing the threat that American settlers posed to native lands. On November 15th, 1789, representatives from the national government, North and South Carolina, the Creeks, and the Cherokees planned to meet to discuss the controversial treaties signed between 1783 and 1789 and to negotiate a new treaty. Washington had to select the representatives to send on behalf of the federal government, another important first for the new president. At his August 22nd meeting, Washington planned to seek advice about what instructions he should give to the commissioners. Because he considered Native American relations to fall under the heading of foreign policy, he followed the constitutional guidelines calling for him with the Senate. On May 25th, 1789, less than a month after his inauguration, Washington sent to the Senate all of the United States' previous treaties with Indian nations, along with a number of supporting documents. After a brief discussion, the Senate postponed its consideration of these papers. At the beginning of August, the Senate created a committee to meet with Washington. That committee planned the minute details of the upcoming meeting, down to where Washington would sit and how he would enter the chamber. On August 20 and 21, Washington nominated commissioners to negotiate with the Southern Indians. On August 21st, he sent an official note to the Senate announcing his visit the next day to discuss the terms of the proposed treaty. When Washington and Knox arrived at Federal Hall at 11:30 a.m., the doorkeeper announced their arrival. Washington sat at the front of the chamber and Knox took the chair to the right. Washington handed his remarks to Knox, who in turn handed them to Vice President John Adams. Adams read the statement, but as Senator William McClay from Pennsylvania recalled, the senator, quote, could not master one sentence of it, end quote. Adams was not known for his public speaking skills, but the senator's struggles weren't entirely his fault. The Senate gathered for their work in the large chamber that occupied the first floor of Federal Hall. Because of the August heat in New York City, the doorkeeper had opened the windows in search of a cooling breeze. But along with fresh air, noise, Wall Street's pedestrians, carriages, peddlers, and horses flowed into the Senate chamber. The clamor overpowered Adams' voice, so few senators could make out the words that Washington had so carefully crafted. After a few complaints, Adams repeated the speech from the beginning. Washington's remarks offered a brief synopsis of the current diplomatic state between the United States and the Southern Indians and posed 7 questions for the Senate to answer with an aye or a no. Adams finished his recitation and sat. The seconds ticked by as the senators remained in awkward silence. A few shuffled papers or cleared their throats. McClay speculated in his diary that his colleagues were so intimidated by Washington's presence in the Senate chamber that they cowered in shameful silence. eager to show that they could be active participants in the creation of foreign policy, McClay stood up and suggested referring the Washington 7 questions to committee for discussion in detail. Washington then lost his temper, stood out at, "This defeats every purpose of my coming here." The senators fell into a stunned hush before Washington acquiesced to McClay's suggestion and offered to return to the Senate a few days later. Although he did not return to the following Monday, his first visit to the Senate was an inauspicious, the executive legislative relationship. The book is The Cabinet by Leslie M. Chervinsky.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Welcome back to the second hour of our program. On the line with us is Michael Cohen, the principal at Crisis X, a crisis management company. Previously was the personal attorney of Donald Trump, executive VP of the Trump Organization, special counsel to Donald Trump. You may recall his previous book, Disloyal, a memoir. He hosts the Mea Culpa with Michael Cohen podcast, by the way. He has a new book out. It's called Revenge. The website is revenge-thebook.com. His Twitter handle is MichaelCohen212. Michael, welcome back to the program. I'm curious about your role as kind of a fixer or consigliere or whatever you want to call it in the Trump Organization. To what extent was the Trump Organization back in the day run along the lines of other more mainstream, typically Italian, but there are obviously versions unique to different ethnicities, crime families in New York City?
Clear about this. Donald Trump, the Trump Organization was not Mafia Inc. It was not Crime Central. Donald behaved like a mafia boss. He had learned that early on in his career when he was under the tutelage of the very infamous Roy Cohen, his lawyer, who represented many high-ranking mafia individuals. Donald has no email address. He was always taught not to have his fingerprints on anything. Now, again, what we do have to remember is that the Trump Organization is a mom and pop, myopic real estate development company. I mean, there were no dead bodies, which is a line that for some reason media tries to use a lot. Michael Cohen knew where all the skeletons were located. If we're referring to which contractor we didn't pay or which law firm, which was virtually all of them, that we didn't pay and for what reason, yes, that I did. Did we sue people based upon defamation? Yes. Did we try to renegotiate contracts post the signature? Yes. But as it relates to anything on par with being a mafia-style family with murder and extortion and racketeering, the answer is that never happened.
Yeah, so Trump is not Tony Soprano.
He's about the same size, but no.
He's basically a small-time crook. To what extent was Donald Trump saved by Russians and Saudis, particularly in the 90s after his company went south?
Okay, so bankruptcy. I was not with Donald in the 90s. In fact, I was just finishing law school and starting my legal career. I started with Trump in 2006, 2007. Now, Eric Trump, who is by far the dumbest of all of the children, made a couple of comments about how Russians are big buyers of Trump apartments, condominiums, whether it's in New York, Florida, or wherever else that they may be. First of all, that's just not a true statement. And as far as Russia bailing Donald out in the 1990s, or even in 2006, 2007, when I joined, there are some Russians that ended up buying in his properties, but percentage-wise, it's de minimis. And the same holds true for
Saudi Arabia. I mean, the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia has a full floor apartment at one of the Trump properties across the street from the United Nations. But then again, so do many different countries. Again, it is a de minimis number. And these sort of promotional statements made by people like Eric or Don Jr., they don't do anything within which to hold Donald accountable, responsible, and for the crimes that he actually has committed.
So what are the crimes that he has committed that concern you? What are the, as a guy who is inside the Trump organization, and now, Donald Trump is a major force in American politics and is embracing fascist governments, elsewhere and around the world. It certainly did as president. What are the things that you think Americans need to be warned about, need to know about?
Well, let's begin with obstruction of justice. That was something that I witnessed and I was the recipient of when I was testifying before the House Oversight Committee and 6 other congressional committees. What Donald Trump does using his social media platform is he makes it very uncomfortable for you. He puts your life in jeopardy. And again, he doesn't care about anybody or anything other than himself and what his ultimate goal is. But then you also have on top of that witness tampering. We also see election fraud. We see tax fraud. We see bank fraud. You have the insurrection on January 6th, the DOJ looking into that. The espionage violations that took place at Mar-a-Lago not too long ago. Lying to law enforcement, which is a 1001 violation, which he has done since early on, since probably around 2018. So these are just some of the things that are currently facing Donald Trump, things that the American public should know, because these are the things that will destroy democracy if, in fact, left unchecked.
Donald Trump is still supporting basically the Russian perspective in most regards, in many regards anyway. I saw in your book that you're talking about the Steele dossier. Do you think that Putin has something on him, or do you, like the P tapes, or do you think that, Trump is simply still hoping to cut a deal with Putin for $1 billion property in Moscow, or is it just that he loves dictators because that's the way he wanted to run our country?
Exactly. He looks at Putin almost as a teacher, right? Something that Donald used to say repeatedly in the office was, and it was a Putin, originally Stalin, but Putin adopted comment, that it doesn't matter who you vote for, all that matters is who's counting the vote. And that's what we're seeing now with the election denying. Donald was denying 2020 results before the election even took place. In fact,
was doing that in 2016.
Was many months before. Yes, it was many months that if, in fact, I lose, it's only because it was rigged. What he's doing is he's already putting into the guts of the individuals who support him the notion that if he loses, it has to be a rigged system and that your right to your vote doesn't mean anything and it doesn't count. Now, I do take in chapter 1 of my book, which I think is really a must read for individuals who want to understand what happens when you have a president, an immoral president, who retains the services of a equally complicit and duplicitous attorney general, that they weaponize the Department of Justice to go against their critics. That's what they did, as far as to me. And my hope is by the end of the book, you will see that the story that the media has made of me and that the story you think you know about me is in fact not accurate at all. And this is what happens. This is what happens, again, when a president weaponizes the Justice Department to go against the critics.
I remember when, you got out of jail and then they basically wanted you to sign a document saying that you wouldn't publish a book, and you refused to do that, under advice from your attorney, but just, you're an attorney too. It's like, please surrender your First Amendment right. You refused to do that, and immediately they shackled you and hauled you back off to jail. And I remember thinking, oh my God, Bill Barr is he's just as corrupt as he was in the 90s, in 1992, when he shut down the entire Iran-Contra investigation to hide the crimes of the Bush or the Reagan and Bush administration back in the day.
And did so as well as with the Mueller investigation and the memo.
Yeah.
This is who Bill Barr is. So the fact that he thinks now by claiming that he told Donald that he lost the election should give him a pass and an invitation back into polite society is absolutely, it's ludicrous on his part, and it should not happen. All of these individuals, from Donald himself to Bill Barr to his complicit, sycophantic followers and those that were around him in his inner circle, they should all be held accountable. But, you brought up the Steele dossier. If I could touch on that for a moment. The Steele dossier, as it related to me, the 11 allegations are all inaccurate. They're all lies. Whether it was the notion that I ever went to Prague. I've never been to Czechoslovakia. I've never been to Prague. I just never been. Even members of the press started claiming, oh, we spoke to Cohen and he said that he was there. Those are all lies. And this is a problem too. Media has to be right because we rely upon the media to get it right. And when they don't, there's no way for them to retract the damage that they've done. As it relates to Steele, think about how the entire Steele dossier came into being. It was originally a Democratic opposition paper.
Oh, it was originally the Marco Rubio campaign.
Right, originally. And then ultimately...
and then when Rubio got knocked out of the primary by Trump.
No, it was originally started by the Clinton campaign, who realized that it was nonsense, taken over by Rubio, and then ultimately passed along to John McCain, who gave it to Comey, and then up and up and up. When they realized that everything that they were saying about me was wrong, they needed then to try to figure out what else can they do in order to figure out how to get a hold of Michael Cohen, because both sides wanted to kill me. Republicans wanted Trump out and Democrats wanted Trump out, and they thought that I was the linchpin into doing it. Ultimately, they then passed along this nonsensical argument of tax evasion, and I go into it in depth. Not only do I do it, this is not a new statement for me. If they looked at the Petrillo sentencing memo, what we gave to Judge William Pauley, they would have figured out that all of the allegations, all of the crimes that I was forced to plead guilty to were nonsensical. They were all lies. The reason I did it is because they threatened to indict my wife as a co-conspirator in 48 hours. Couldn't take that risk.
Yeah, which is, again, back to how corrupt the Bill Barr administration was. The book, which is just breathtaking. The book is Revenge, is Michael Cohen's new book. It'll be out in a week or so. You can pre-order it right now wherever you find fine books. Michael Cohen is the author, Michael Cohen 212 on Twitter, and revenge-thebook.com on the internet. Michael, thanks for dropping by. It's great talking with you.
You got it, Tom. You be well.
Thank you. You too. 18 minutes past the hour. We'll be back with more of the news of the day. How OPEC might be planning to manipulate our midterm elections. And is Liz Truss backing down, or is she just, holding her fire? We'll discuss those things on the other side of this break.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Fair and only slightly unbalanced. We'll be right back. And welcome back. Randy in Ottawa, Iowa. Hey, Randy, what's on your mind today?
Hey, Tom. How are you today?
Good. What's up?
Hey, do you recall last week you were talking about Hitler and how big business and the millionaires of those at that time, the big business influences were with him, and then once he got into power, he turned on them?
Yeah, I recall discussing it. I remember reading Fritz Tyson's book, I Paid Hitler.
Okay. Well, this morning I was reading my news feed, and I saw an article, I believe it was on the AP, about an epidemic of billionaires dying from murder in Russia.
Yeah, being pushed out of windows, oddly enough.
Well,
among other things.
And the thing, I think what we're doing here, if you look at, and this is what I wrote about on my Facebook page today under that topic, was that I think what we're witnessing is when oligarchy turns to fascism, and then right now the murders of these billionaires and millionaires, oligarchs, are it's fascism consuming itself. It's the beginning of a fascist state forming or falling apart. It's hard telling how it ever survives, because I think that Putin has overloaded his ox cart, so to say, so to speak. That some of the sanctions and things like that are actually working, and some of the propaganda, like the CPAC thing that was in the paper today, and some of these other things like the Nord Stream pipeline deal, that's all just propaganda, and we just have to be interested in the truth. I wanted to touch on that. That I noticed that this is fascism. This is a form of fascism that is consuming itself to sustain itself.
Yeah.
And it is a downward spiral that Putin is in right now. And thank you for all of the historical reference and information that you bring to me on a weekly basis and a daily basis. And
thank you, Randy. I think your analysis is absolutely accurate, and I don't think that Putin is going to politically survive this. We'll see how it shakes out, but I'm concerned. Thank you, Randy. Connor in Wenatchee, Washington. Hey, Connor, what's on your mind today?
Hey, Tom. Thanks for all you do. There was a caller a little while ago, I think it was Rob, that was just kind of using the BS argument that you sniffed out about electric vehicles crashing the grid.
Right. It's a joke.
If everyone switched. Yeah. I don't know. I feel like I have to point out that, refining oil takes a lot of energy. It's like 5 megawatts or 5 watts or maybe megawatts per gallon. But, I think if people switch, there'd be a dwindling of the refineries and,
well, not only that, his premise was that everybody needs electricity at the same time. And the fact of the matter is most people with a plug-in electric vehicle only plug it in once a week. And, and typically they charge overnight. In fact, you can program them to only charge overnight when the demand on the grid is low. And in many places, like here in Portland, you can get a couple cents a kilowatt hour discount if you charge your car at night. You just sign up for a different plan. And that's very common all across the country because, it helps the utilities with load balancing. We don't need to do anything to build out EV structure with regard to our homes other than, installing an outlet for these things. Connor, thank you. Spot on. Change starts with you. You can be calling your Democratic or Republican representatives to let them know what you think by calling 202-224-3121. It's the Capitol switchboard. It'll get you right through to them. Back in 2018, Pastor Dave Barnhart of the St. Juania United Methodist Church in Birmingham, Alabama, delivered a sermon that is worth revisiting. He said, "The unborn are a convenient group of people to advocate for. They never make demands of you. They are morally uncomplicated, unlike the incarcerated, addicted, or the chronically poor. They don't resent your condescension or complain that you're not politically correct. Unlike widows, they don't ask you to question patriarchy. Unlike orphans, they don't need money, education, or childcare. Unlike aliens, they don't bring all that racial, cultural, and religious baggage that you dislike. They allow you to feel good about yourself without any work at creating or maintaining relationships. And when they're born, you can forget about them because they cease to be unborn. It's almost as if, by being born, they have died to you. You can love the unborn and advocate for them without substantially challenging your own wealth or power." The whole clip is over at thomhartmann.com. Check it out. 24 minutes past the hour. Welcome back. And there's a couple of other stories that I just wanted to highlight for you. One is I think a major big deal, and it's not being discussed in the media. I mean, people are talking right now about Trump's racist attacks on Mitch McConnell's wife, and that's pretty mind-boggling. And his death threat against Mitch McConnell. I mean, what we are watching is the rise of naked fascist rhetoric and the collapse of rational political rhetoric. But more importantly, I haven't seen a single Republican call out Trump for his racist attack on Elaine Chao. Not one. Have you? I mean, it just looks like the entire Republican Party is scared to death of this man, which is crazy. Okay, but I wanted to get into this other, what's going on with OPEC. On Wednesday, OPEC is going to be holding a meeting. It's OPEC Plus. This is OPEC with the group's de facto leader is Saudi Arabia, but they've got Russia in there now. And Russia and Saudi Arabia are both looking at the Biden administration and saying, you know, we'd really rather have Donald Trump or any other Republican, because Republicans love fascists and Democrats don't. And so on Wednesday, they are going to cut their production. Now, Saudi Arabia has already cut their production by 100,000 barrels a day. They did this just last month as a middle finger to Joe Biden. But now we're talking about further cuts. This was announced yesterday, and today, oil prices in Europe and the United States rose 4%. You know, we're already seeing gas above $5 a gallon here in Oregon. You know, they say it's because there's a refinery problem, but hey, it's popping up all over the country. I believe that these guys this is going to be part of their October surprise. And it wouldn't surprise me if Jared Kushner, who's got a $2 billion deal with the Saudis and is talking to them all the time, and God only knows how much money they gave Donald Trump that he put in his offshore accounts, that these guys are talking to the Saudis and saying, hey, let's work together to cripple Biden. I mean, we got to get gas prices up above $5 a gallon to make this happen nationwide. And the Saudis are just all gung-ho on this. Oil inventories right now, by the way, are at very low levels, meaning that the market will respond to this very quickly. The New York Times said a sizable cut by Saudi Arabia would appear to be an act of defiance of the Biden administration. I would go beyond that. I would say it's an act of sabotage of the Biden administration. I've got to tell you what's going on in the UK. It'll take just a moment. Liz Truss backing down on her 45% tax rate. Major U-turn. Is it going to last? What's going on here? Is trickle-down economics dead? I'll tell you about that on the other side of the break, and then pick up your phone calls for the next half hour. Stick around.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
It's your media support group for We the People. Back with more of your calls on the other side of this break. Our book today in the Thom Hartmann Book Club is the second, Race and Guns in a Fatally Unequal America by Carol Anderson. This is from the introduction. It was like a snuff film, that July 6th, 2016 live stream. Philando Castile sat in his car, buckled in, bleeding, dying. "Why did you shoot him, sir?" asked his fiancée, Diamond Reynolds, pain piercing her every word. Castile, who had been pulled over in a suburb of St. Paul, Minnesota, because his, quote, wide-set nose, end quote, supposedly resembled that of a robbery suspect, had been reaching for his ID, but in order to avoid any surprises, let the police officer know he had a gun with him, a legally permitted, right-to-carry concealed gun. That was all the cop needed to know. Officer Geronimo Yanez began shooting. Castile's death came just one day after Alton Sterling's down in Louisiana. He, too, was carrying a gun, which was not unusual in this right-to-carry state. Granted, Sterling had a felony conviction, so owning a firearm was for him illegal, but he had been robbed before and wanted protection. On July 5th, 2016, the Baton Rouge police received a 911 call that there was a man with a weapon threatening customers at a local convenience store. As officers rolled onto the scene, they saw Sterling sitting there selling CDs and DVDs, just as the store owner allowed him to do and indeed welcomed. The threatening man was not Sterling. In fact, there was no threatening man. It had been a prank call, but that didn't matter. Within a few minutes, police had thrown the black man down, pinned him to the asphalt, and then started yelling that Sterling had a gun. He did. It was in his pocket where he could hardly reach it, what with the officers squatting on both his legs and one arm. Nevertheless, the police began firing round after round into his prone body, point blank. Blood poured out of his chest. but not for long. Alton Sterling was dead. The back-to-back deaths of these two black men police had shot for carrying guns should have jolted into action the Second Amendment's staunchest advocate, the National Rifle Association. In 1995, for example, the organization's denunciations flew fast and furious when it contended that law enforcement not only overreacted, but went out of its way to kill gun owners. Angered by the deaths at the Branch Davidian compound in Waco, Texas, and the siege and firefight at Ruby Ridge, Idaho, both of which were sparked by federal agents serving warrants for weapons violations, Wayne LaPierre, the NRA's executive vice president, angrily wrote, quote, "If you have a badge, you have the government's go-ahead to harass, intimidate, and even murder law-abiding citizens," end quote. He further denounced cops as, quote, "jackbooted government thugs who have more power to take away our constitutional rights, break in our doors, seize our guns, destroy our property, and even injure or kill us." Nearly 2 decades later, that sentiment had not changed. This was evident when Nevada rancher Cliven Bundy, who had refused to pay over $1 million in fees for grazing his cattle on public land, summoned his gun-toting, self-styled militiamen to do battle with federal authorities to prevent the seizure of his herd for restitution. Richard Mack, a former recipient of the NRA's Law Enforcement Officer of the Year award, asserted, "If federal agents are going to start killing people, I'm sorry, but to show the world how ruthless these people are, women and children need to be placed in the front lines as human shields." Mack didn't flinch as he insisted, quote, "Women need to be the first ones shot. I would have put my own wife or daughter there on the front lines, and I would have been a screaming bloody murder to watch them die," end quote. Larry Pratt, a speaker at the NRA's 2014 National Convention, commenting on the fact that Bundy, quote, "backed them," the Bureau of Land Management agents, down with automatic rifles and other deadly weaponry, proudly called that armed confrontation, quote, "a proper, legitimate, lawful response to illegitimate, unlawful exercise of government power, particularly on the federal level," end quote. Yet how quickly the NRA's swagger disappeared when government agents gunned down Philando Castile and Alton Sterling for merely carrying guns. Sterling's death didn't even merit acknowledgement. As for Castile, the NRA broke its silence only after inordinate pressure from African-American members led the gun manufacturers' lobby to issue a tepid statement that the Second Amendment was applicable, quote, "regardless of race, religion, or sexual orientation." When pressed further by many of its members to stand up for Castile, the often fierce organization demurred, saying it was, quote, "important for the NRA not to comment while the investigation is ongoing." This situational silence did not go unnoticed. The NRA had not only loudly defended the rights of those at the Branch Davidian cult and at Ruby Ridge, men who had actually shot and killed members of law enforcement, but the organization had also doubled down on calling for more guns in the face of mass shootings in a public school in Newtown, Connecticut, and a movie theater in Aurora, Colorado. Yet here, the guardian of the Second Amendment was now deliberately ignoring the inconvenient fact that black men had been killed for merely possessing a firearm. "Where's the NRA?" asked journalist Hannah Kozlowska. "Didn't Sterling and Philando Castile have Second Amendment rights too?" David Graham in The Atlantic coolly observed that, quote, "two shootings give a strong sense that the Second Amendment does not apply to black Americans the same way it does to white Americans," end quote. Washington Post columnist Eugene Robinson wrote that he saw the old Jim Crow whites only sign plastered above the Second Amendment. The book, The Second, by Carol Anderson. Hey, thanks so much for sharing our program and for reaching out to our stations and sponsors and letting them know that you're listening. It really means a lot to us. Welcome back. So Liz Truss, the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom, has now backed down on her on doing away with the 45% income tax bracket for the morbidly rich in the United Kingdom. I'm not even sure it's the morbidly rich. I mean, it's people making over $150,000 a year. Which would be, you know, the merely well off, I suppose. But in any case, she has said, okay, we're not going to do it. Give up. And the markets have rewarded the pound It's back up. It's gone up substantially. She's this tax rate, scrapping that top tax rate would not have caused that much money, but it was kind of the principle of the thing. I really think that what we're seeing here, I mean, keep in mind, Margaret Thatcher began this madness in a big way, being the first national leader to fully, officially, enthusiastically, and explicitly embrace neoliberalism. That what we are seeing now is the death of neoliberalism. Now, she is also, in addition to saying that she was going to cut that top tax rate, in order to essentially pay for it, to pay for that top tax rate, she was going to do what Republicans don't do. The two Santa Claus theory here in the United States specifies that Republicans cut taxes and run up debt, but they wait until there's a Democrat in office to yell and scream about the debt and force the Democrat to cut the social programs, which is exactly what Bill Clinton did. He just walked right into it. Reagan set it up. Judah Wanniski actually laid it out in 1977 in the Wall Street Journal. Here's how it should work. Reagan did it for 8 years, tripled the national debt in 8 years. Took us from less than $1 trillion to over $2.5 trillion, $2.4 trillion, and didn't cut anything. Spent like a drunken sailor, ran up the national debt. Everybody thought, wow, he knows how to make an economy hot. Well, hey, I can show you what it looks like to live large, too. Just give me a credit card with $1 trillion limit on it. But what Liz Truss was going to do was not wait for the Labor Party, the progressives, to come into office and then scream about how they had to cut back on, for example, the National Health Service. She was going to do it herself. Her plan included a $13 billion reduction in national insurance and a $17 billion plan to reverse a corporate tax increase. And those things she has not yet spoken to. So the United Kingdom, the folks in the UK are holding their breath. What's going to happen with that? So let's pick up your phone calls. And April in Newark, Delaware. Hey, April, what's on your mind today?
Hi. I have been to Babcock Farm. Ranch. They call it Babcock Ranch. Yeah. And I'm telling you, it was so interesting. And I was there in the March of 2018. And I guess they've really done well. At the time, we were visiting people in Fort Myers who live in the Tony part. I hope their place is okay. And they said, you got to see this place. It's all solar power. Mm-hmm. And it was just, it was sort of like being in a science fiction place or on the moon or something. It was very vast and very sort of barren, but everywhere were these poles with solar panels. Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's in fact the first caller to the show today was somebody who lives there at Babcock Ranch.
Oh, I didn't hear that one.
Yeah, and he was like, we did not lose power. We did not lose any part of our house. He said the houses are all built with hurricane-resistant glass. They have hurricane windows.
Right.
And so, nobody was injured. They had power through the whole thing. They had internet through the whole thing. They have their own water system, and they had water, which is powered by their solar electricity. So they had water through the whole thing. They continue to. Nobody's having to boil. And they're only 12 miles northeast of Fort Myers.
Well, and the thing of it is, when we were there, people were really questioning whether that place was going to make a go of it.
Really?
And they really thought, they thought, and the homes were kind of strange in a way, but they did it, and I think it's great.
Yeah.
And also, I have solar power in my house. We built a house about 10 years ago, and they wanted to cut down this huge tulip tree, and we said we don't want to do that. So we got them to put panels like basically all over the different parts of the house. It's kind of crazy. They're in sections, and it's great. We get a check every month, and I'm telling you, I love it.
That's great. That's great. And you're in Delaware.
We're in Delaware, and we happen to have, like I say, they wanted to do the one tree, but we have enough sun from, that would be east, I guess, or something. Yeah. But we do have the south and the west and all that to get it from. So
that's great. The one kind of dark moment of the fellow who called, who said he lives in Babcock Farms and has watched the show, or ranch, and has watched the show for years, is that Florida Power and Electric, or Florida Power and Light, I guess, FPL, who put up the 700,000 panel solar farm, solar area for the community, has been actively discouraging people from putting their own solar on their house. Because as long as people buy solar from the Florida Power and Light solar farm, which is right on the edge of town, Solar Power and Light can sell solar electricity to the homeowners, whereas if the homeowners put panels on their own houses, and Florida Power and Light has gotten the DeSantis administration and the Republicans to pass and sign legislation over the last couple of years, making it more difficult for individual home. This is the Sunshine State. It's more difficult to put solar panels on your roof. It's crazy. I mean, it's just crazy.
That's terrible. That's
but
terrible.
it is the power
really
of a corrupt government and a corrupting
down there. But anyway, I'm so happy they're making a go of it at that place, though. But it is so weird to sit and have dinner in a little patio. I think he's gone.
No, I'm here. I'm listening.
You're there. Oh, sorry. And sit in this little patio and have all these solar lights like towering over you. It was just really crazy. I mean, I felt like I was in another world then. I really did. Yeah. And anyway, it's just anybody that's in that area ought to stop by there.
It's like the town of the future out of the
That's what it was. That's exactly it. It's like some kind of future Jetsons place or something. Yeah.
There you go.
I would say anybody should stop by, and I'm so happy they did well.
Yeah, me too. April, thank you for the call. Michael in Greenville, South Carolina. Hey, Michael, what's on your mind today?
Hello, Tom. Been listening since you took over from Al Franken on Air America. I am a retired Army Staff Sergeant, Uber driver. I own two hybrid cars, a CT 200H, which is the nice version of your Prius. And a Kia Niro hybrid that I average 50 miles per gallon. Wow. The guy that was talking about the batteries, I have over 12,000 passengers in 5 years. Nobody except for one person has ever told me that they had problems with the hybrid batteries.
Right.
And he traded in his Prius for a Kia Niro hybrid.
Right. No, this is, the guy who was calling in was spouting the kind of propaganda that the fossil fuel industry has been pumping out through these right-wing think tanks and editing Wikipedia and everything else for years and years and years. It's nonsense.
It's absolutely BS. My wife drives her Lexus 200H, and she gets 38 miles per gallon. When I drive it, I get 47. But my Kia, I average 50 miles per gallon.
Yeah, that's spectacular, and and you're right. The way you drive has a big influence on it too. Michael, thank you for sharing that. Hack in Calgary, Alberta, Canada. Hey, Hack, what's on your mind today?
Well, actually, I'm in Albuquerque right now, Calgary.
Oh, okay.
But anyway, what all consumer products have in common when they come on the market and go toward market saturation is the price goes down.
Mm-hmm. And that's what's happening right now. I mean, you could buy electric cars in the $20,000 range.
And I also have an argument against the electric vehicle haters.
Which is?
Way back in 1903, Wright brothers had a powered flight for, maybe about a minute or so. And, of course, as we all know, that's the last anybody ever heard of aviation.
Right. Oh, so your point is that at the beginning of the life cycle of a new technology, there's always a relatively brief but difficult period. Is that your point, Herb? Or Hank?
Yeah.
Yeah, I totally get it, and you're absolutely right. That is a great shutdown. Thank you very much for that, Hack. Paul in Woodinville, Washington. Hey, Paul, what's up?
So the new Supreme Court term begins today.
That's right.
And with some interesting cases, but I'm most concerned about the Moore versus Harper case.
Me too.
With the legislature from North Carolina asking the court to make the determination that because of Article 2, Section 1, Clause 2, which says each state shall appoint as the legislature thereof shall determine or a number of electors. And by that sentence alone, the legislature of North Carolina is arguing that they have total autonomy free of any of the other branches and checks and balances of government in the state of North Carolina, that being the state Supreme Court or the governor or anything. So how does the Supreme Court get in on this? Well, there are two issues. First of all, there's Article 2, Section 1, which gives to answer that question. There's also the fact that the North Carolina Supreme Court has told the legislature that they need to get their gerrymandering lines in keeping with the Civil Rights Act and the Voting Rights Act. So those are federal laws, so that's the in for the Supreme Court. But there are also a number of abstention doctrines that the federal courts have to not interfere or undermine, or they should defer to state courts.
Yeah, tell us about that in 2000 in Bush v. Gore.
That's right. Well, yeah, they don't really give a crap about. That's what I'm worried about. That they will just go ahead and say, yeah, the legislature has
right.
Full. And now
isn't you know, to split hairs here, Paul? Isn't it entirely possible that the intent of that statement in the Constitution is that the legislature shall define by legislation, signed by the governor, how the electoral votes are apportioned? And in fact, every state in the union has done that, has passed a law. There are two outliers, Maine and Nebraska, as I recall, and where they have different parts of the state apportion their electors in different ways, and they basically split the state in half. But still, the legislature has decided. What this legislature is saying is that we should be able to override our own law without passing another law. Isn't that essentially it?
Yeah, that's not splitting hairs. That's exactly what they're trying to do by essentially trying to justify the fake electors scheme that says, if we don't like the outcome, and you're exactly right, they can the legislatures, as the legislatures shall determine by the laws of their state, which those are also in check and balance by, as you say, signed by the governor and checked by the state courts. So they don't get to get out of the three branches of government in their state, and I'm worried that this court will. And the reason I'm worried about this is that I listened to. I'm thinking that the conservative right wing is kind of handicapping and telegraphing the court. Here's how you should decide, and here's why. I heard a professor of political science from Hillsdale College this morning on another show, basically telling the court how to rule and saying, he said, I don't think the court will rule on racial gerrymandering. They're just going to kind of punt on that because that's a political issue. Well, that's a bunch of bullcrap. Yeah. That's one of the reasons the court has jurisdiction is because it has to do with the Voting Rights Act.
Well, it's only a political issue because you've got one political party that doesn't want black people to vote.
Well, yeah, but that's not the definition of. I won't go into too wonky, but the definition of what is a political issue,
I realize,
is
a different thing.
Different. That's not what it's not what's meant, and it definitely does because it involves race. Does get strict scrutiny under the doctrines that we already have established, equal protection doctrine.
I agree, but the bottom line is, Paul, this court is no respecter of precedent or law, and my question is, what's it going to take for a broad consensus in America to emerge that something needs to be done about the court? I don't think we're there yet, but I think we're heading in that direction. Paul, I got to run. Thanks for your call.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit ThomHartmann.com for audio and video archives.
Will it take blowing up our voting rights? Will it take further eroding, our right to be protected from gun violence? What's it going to take? And welcome back. Elaine in Hazel Crest, Illinois. Hey, Elaine, what's on your mind today?
Oh, a lot. How are you doing?
I'm well. What's up?
Good. I just have basically a comment. Why is there so much concern by the pasty white men in Congress and the Supreme Court, what goes on in my panties? This whole abortion.
It is, this goes back 7,000 years. It's called misogyny.
I just can't get over that, and I had to share that. I shared that with a couple of my friends, both male and female. That I just don't get it.
No, they're absolutely obsessed with what goes on in your panties, and you know, part of it is the whole white supremacist thing that, you know, there's not enough white babies, there's too many brown people reproducing in America, and we got to stop abortion because most abortions are in white women, which is all true. Not all true. I mean, you know what I'm saying.
Yeah,
their statistics are correct. Their interpretation is bizarre. And part of it is just that, you know, hey, anything that'll put women back in the bedroom and back in the kitchen and out of the workplace and you know, out of politics is what they're all in favor of. Elaine, thank you for the call. Yeah, your point is well taken. Rick in Huntington Beach, California. Hey, Rick. Thanks for listening to KPFK.
How are you?
Good.
Just worried about the fact that the Democrats are about to lose the election that should be over already in their favor. They're doing 2016 all over again.
How so?
They're being so arrogant. Myself and a number of my friends across the country have been trying to reach out to just help. Okay, just reach. I've reached out to everything from local the Democratic Committee of Orange County, all the way up to people running for the Senate, to the Democratic National Committee, and of the 15 or 20 people I've tried to reach, one group sent me back a thing saying we'll talk to you if you'll be a phone banker, but nothing else. And the other person invited me to a meeting, which was supposed to be a meeting, and all it was a meeting in a parking lot that sent you out to canvass without telling you that. And nobody else has responded at all. My notes have been everything from, hey, I'd like to help, call me. Or
Rick, you need to run for precinct committee person and get inside this party and change it.
Well, I'm a little bit too old for that, but I'd love to be able to get to.
Well, there are some groups that are doing a lot of great on the ground work. One is indivisible.org. The other is, there's a lot of stuff being organized over at dailyKOS.com.
Daily who?
KOS, DAILYKOS.com.
Yeah, they're too big to talk to anybody.
I don't think so. I think you can even.
I've tried.
Okay. All right.
And the thing is, like, yeah, indivisible, I'll try. But the thing is, the reason Republicans win a lot of times is the fact that they get all their people saying the same thing: lock her up, socialism, anti-cop. Democrats Republicans have given the Democrats that for this election, and not just abortion, about a whole lot of other things. And with, I grant you, I only have 40 years of experience working with everybody from mom and pops as marketing up to governments. So I may not know very much. Yeah. But if you get people to say the same thing, you get
repetition is the key to belief. Yeah, you're absolutely right, Rick. Thank you. Thank you, and good luck. Hey, I have a new book out. It's called The Hidden History of Neoliberalism, How Reaganism Gutted America and How to Restore Its Greatness. Greg Palast calls it a hand grenade of a book. You can pick it up wherever fine books are available. Tag you're it. Are you feeling sad and depressed? Are you anxious, worried about the future, feeling isolated and alone? You might be suffering from capitalism. Symptoms include homelessness, unemployment, poverty, hunger, feelings of powerlessness, fear, listlessness, disenfranchisement, isolation, loss of identity, self-loathing, feelings of guilt, loss of free speech, incarceration, fines, suicidal thoughts, death, or revolution. Now, that's kind of the funny one, but the serious thing is that capitalism, unregulated capitalism, unrestrained, laissez-faire, neoliberal capitalism, no income tax capitalism, no regulation capitalism, does produce this kind of a crisis. And we need to acknowledge that. We need to, and thank goodness we are moving in the right direction, I think, back toward regulated capitalism like Franklin Roosevelt gave us, rather than the unregulated neoliberal capitalism of the Trump years. I got a video about this over at ThomHartmann.com. You can check it out. Tag you're it. And welcome back. Chris in Myrtle Beach, South Carolina. It says you disagree with me that you don't think that OPEC is planning on raising prices in order to influence the election. Tell me. Tell me about it.
Hey, Tom, thanks for having me on. I really appreciate it. So I'm coming from a little bit of a different perspective than your listeners. Definitely a neoconservative, Trump, that kind of lens that some of your listeners and yourself describe. But, I mean, you could talk about OPEC, it's your show, but, I mean, just listening, I just think that the difference between where I'm coming from and where you're coming from are so vast and far apart that I fear, because I do have a fear.
Chris, I haven't heard anything so far about the price of oil or OPEC. What did you call about?
Okay, so OPEC sounds like, according to your program, cut production, which is going to just prior to the election. Is that correct? That's what I heard on your program.
Chris, you're fading in and out. I'm not sure if you can do anything about that. You're breaking up pretty badly.
I agree that OPEC is cutting production. That's what you had stated.
That's what they're predicting for the Wednesday meeting. Russia has already said that they want OPEC to cut production.
That is unfortunate, and I don't know about what information you have about Trump and anybody else that's working directly with either OPEC and or Russia to help participate in this cut in production in order to hurt.
Oh, you don't need, Donald Trump doesn't need to call up Saudi Arabia and say, hey, raise the price of oil. You've got an entire political party that has launched a nationwide political campaign that they pretty much pulled back on in the last few weeks, saying that high gas prices were the fault of Joe Biden. You had, stickers, I did that, appearing on gas pumps. You actually had ads being run by Republican candidates using high gas prices as the key to their ads. So here now you have OPEC and Russia getting together, Saudi Arabia and Russia, good friends of Trump and the Republicans, saying, yeah, we're going to get together and raise the price of oil. What's not to love if you're a Republican? I get it, Chris. You want Americans screwed. That's the Republican way, right?
I'm an independent, actually, but suppose that's true. Why do we have limited supply? Why do we have limited supply in our reserves?
Because demand has exploded since the end of the pandemic.
Okay, let's say that's true as well. Supply and demand. Your argument on supply and demand is not even coherent then.
All right. Well, Chris, I can't explain it because I'm hitting the end of the break here. This is the end of the hour.
I appreciate the call. And listen, hopefully we could come together as Americans. And lastly, because I do fear that we're so divided that
would be a good thing.
It's going to be a bad place.
Chris, I got to run, but I'm with you. Thank you.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann.
In addition to bringing you the Thom Hartmann Program here on Free Speech TV and Video Media Online, we also have a whole set of ways you can interact with us and tools you can use to spread the word about the importance of democracy and the threats to it in our republic. First, there's your daily homework. Sue Nethercutt puts together a daily email newsletter that has a link to every story I discuss on the air, so you can find my sources and you can share them with your friends. It's free and you can sign up at thomhartmann.com. Second, I publish my daily take every day over at the HartmannReport.com website. That's also free if you want the daily 5 days a week rant in your inbox. No ads either. Third, we have the podcasts. There's the free 1-hour version of our daily show that's advertising supported. You can find that wherever you get your podcasts normally. And then there's also the podcast of the entire 3-hour show with no advertisements, and that's available by subscription over at thomhartmann.com. So check them all out at thomhartmann.com and hartmannreport.com.
We take life back!
Our book today in the Thom Hartmann Book Club is The Second, Race and Guns in a Fatally Unequal America by Carol Anderson. This is from the introduction. It was like a snuff film, that July 6, 2016 live stream. Philando Castile sat in his car, buckled in, bleeding, dying. "Why did you shoot him, sir?" asked his fiancée, Diamond Reynolds, pain piercing her every word. Castile, who had been pulled over in a suburb of St. Paul, Minnesota, because his, quote, wide-set nose, end quote, supposedly resembled that of a robbery suspect, had been reaching for his ID, but in order to avoid any surprises, let the police officer know he had a gun with him, a legally permitted, right-to-carry concealed gun. That was all the cop needed to know. Officer Geronimo Yanez began shooting. Castile's death came just one day after Alton Sterling's down in Louisiana. He, too, was carrying a gun, which was not unusual in this right-to-carry state. Granted, Sterling had a felony conviction, so owning a firearm was for him illegal, but he had been robbed before and wanted protection. On July 5th, 2016, the Baton Rouge police received a 911 call that there was a man with a weapon threatening customers at a local convenience store. As officers rolled onto the scene, they saw Sterling sitting there, selling CDs and DVDs, just as the store owner allowed him to do and indeed welcomed. The threatening man was not Sterling. In fact, there was no threatening man. It had been a prank call, but that didn't matter. Within a few minutes, police had thrown the black man down, pinned him to the asphalt, and then started yelling that Sterling had a gun. He did. It was in his pocket where he could hardly reach it, what with the officers squatting on both his legs and one arm. Nevertheless, the police began firing round after round into his prone body, point blank. Blood poured out of his chest, but not for long. Alton Sterling was dead. The back-to-back deaths of these two black men police had shot for carrying guns should have jolted into action the Second Amendment's staunchest advocate, the National Rifle Association. In 1995, for example, the organization's denunciations flew fast and furious when it contended that law enforcement not only overreacted, but went out of its way to kill gun owners. Angered by the deaths at the Branch Davidian compound in Waco, Texas, and the siege and firefight at Ruby Ridge, Idaho, both of which were sparked by federal agents serving warrants for weapons violations, Wayne LaPierre, the NRA's executive vice president, angrily wrote, quote, "If you have a badge, you have the government's go-ahead to harass, intimidate, and even murder law-abiding citizens," end quote. He further denounced cops as, quote, "jackbooted government thugs who have more power to take away our constitutional rights, break in our doors, seize our guns, destroy our property, and even injure or kill us." Nearly 2 decades later, that sentiment had not changed. This was evident when Nevada rancher Cliven Bundy, who had refused to pay over $1 million in fees for grazing his cattle on public land, summoned his gun-toting, self-styled militiamen to do battle with federal authorities to prevent the seizure of his herd for restitution. Richard Mack, a former recipient of the NRA's Law Enforcement Officer of the Year award, asserted, "If federal agents are going to start killing people, I'm sorry, but to show the world how ruthless these people are, women and children need to be placed in the front lines as human shields." Mack didn't flinch as he insisted, quote, "Women need to be the first ones shot. I would have put my own wife or daughter there on the front lines, and I would have been a screaming bloody murder to watch them die," end quote. Larry Pratt, a speaker at the NRA's 2014 National Convention, commenting on the fact that Bundy, quote, backed them, the Bureau of Land Management agents, down with automatic rifles and other deadly weaponry, proudly called that armed confrontation, quote, "a proper, legitimate, lawful response to illegitimate, unlawful exercise of government power, particularly on the federal level," end quote. Yet how quickly the NRA's swagger disappeared when government agents gunned down Philando Castile and Alton Sterling for merely carrying guns. Sterling's death didn't even merit acknowledgement. As for Castile, the NRA broke its silence only after inordinate pressure from African-American members led the gun manufacturers' lobby to issue a tepid statement that the Second Amendment was applicable, quote, regardless of race, religion, or sexual orientation. When pressed further by many of its members to stand up for Castile, the often fierce organization demurred, saying it was, quote, important for the NRA not to comment while the investigation is ongoing. This situational silence did not go unnoticed. The NRA had not only loudly defended the rights of those of the Branch Davidian cult and at Ruby Ridge, men who had actually shot and killed members of law enforcement, but the organization had also doubled down on calling for more guns in the face of mass shootings in a public school in Newtown, Connecticut, and a movie theater in Aurora, Colorado. Yet here, the guardian of the Second Amendment was now deliberately ignoring the inconvenient fact that black men had been killed for merely possessing a firearm. Where's the NRA? Asked journalist Hannah Kozlowska. Didn't Sterling and Philando Castile have Second Amendment rights too? David Graham in The Atlantic coolly observed that, quote, two shootings give a strong sense that the Second Amendment does not apply to black Americans the same way it does to white Americans, end quote. Washington Post columnist Eugene Robinson wrote that he saw the old Jim Crow whites only sign plastered above the Second Amendment. The book, The Second, by Carol Anderson. We've got the Carlson-Kremlin feedback loop. I find this absolutely fascinating. This is MediaMatters.org is writing about this. And Tucker Carlson, basically, Russia comes out with propaganda. And the next day, Fox News, at least one host on Fox News, typically Tucker Carlson, is echoing it. It's pretty remarkable. I'll just share, this is the opening paragraph of this piece on Media Matters. Fox News host Tucker Carlson's dubious allegation that the United States sabotaged a natural gas pipeline between Russia and Germany as part of a sinister escalation of Russia's war with Ukraine echoed the Kremlin's own propaganda. Carlson's report is now getting substantial attention from Russian state television, which is promoting his theory and his suggestion for how Russia could strike back at U.S. interests in light of the supposed attack. Now, what Carlson suggested was that Russia could attack our internet cables, the undersea cables that carry our telephone and internet and data services between the United States and Europe. Excuse me, yes, a lot of that, pardon me, a lot of that is on satellites now, but an awful lot of it is still carried by those undersea cables. They note Carlson's coverage of the crisis created by Russia's February invasion of Ukraine generally aligns with the Kremlin's preferred narratives to the point where Russian state media outlets, following their government's explicit instructions, regularly air clips from Tucker Carlson's program. And just hours after Russian officials floated the narrative that the U.S. was responsible for damaging the pipelines, Carlson adopted it as his own. He went on to say, Putin would not do that. He would have to be a suicidal moron to blow up your own energy pipeline. Right. Or you'd have to be a dictator of a country who is seeing the energy pipeline as something that is not going to be used in the future. Europe is rapidly disconnecting themselves. Well, they hadn't been pulling any gas through that pipeline since August to begin with. And they're getting ready for winter. They're buying liquid natural gas and things like that. I mean, it's just a whole different thing. Europe is going a different direction, and Putin realizes this. And by blowing up the pipeline, all he's doing is forcing them to do it, sooner rather than next spring. It's going to have to be in time for this winter. But, instead, again, back to Media Matters. Instead, Carlson strongly suggested that the U.S. had sabotaged the pipelines. Quote, if they did this will be one of the craziest, most destructive things any American administration has ever done. But it would be totally consistent with what they do. What do? They destroy. This is a primetime host on a major television network saying that the United States' mission is to destroy things around the world. And this is the party of patriotism? These are the people who call themselves patriots? He went on to say, we've entered a new phase, one in which the United States is directly at war with the largest nuclear power in the world. If we actually blew up the Nord Stream pipelines, why wouldn't Russia sever undersea internet cables? What would happen if they did that? And that little clip of Tucker Carlson saying basically the Russians should cut our internet cables has gone completely viral in Russia, because the Russian government is pumping and amplifying it. People are wondering, what's going on? Why is it that the new fascist leader of Italy, who is a fascist, she's not just a neo-fascist. I mean, her party is literally the reincarnation of Mussolini's fascist party, the Brothers of Italy. And this is a woman who was a fascist activist when she was 15 years old. People are wondering, why is it that she is being loved on by Republican politicians who are tweeting congratulations on winning the seat and all this kind of stuff? People are wondering why Republicans are doubling down on their affection for Saudi Arabia and Russia and Putin and Mohammed bin Salman, echoing Donald Trump. Why is it that when Donald Trump makes death threats against the Senate Majority Leader and racist threats against his wife, not a single Republican speaks up? Why is it that in individual states around the country that have Republican-controlled governments, they're literally saying, no, we're not going to count the votes this fall. We're just going to tell you how you voted. We're changing the rules, and we're going to take it to the Supreme Court to say that we have the right. It doesn't, as Michael Cohen said, Donald Trump loved to quote back decades ago, it doesn't matter who votes, it matters who counts the votes. Why is it that Americans can watch all this going on, this open embrace of fascists, this embrace by CPAC of the new fascist leader of Italy and of Viktor Orban, the fascist leader of Hungary, and at the last CPAC and at the last Nick Fuentes event, just openly saying, yes, Vladimir Putin, yes, you're our guy, go on. Why is it that this is happening? I can only see one answer or one explanation. And that is that the Republican Party no longer even pretends to believe in democracy. And that the reason why they no longer even pretend to believe in democracy is because they know that their days are numbered. They know that Americans have figured out their game. For 40 years, we have been in this neoliberal experiment, this Reaganism experiment that the Republican Party foisted upon us, and some Democrats went along with. And we now can see the wreckage of it all around us, as can the Brits when Liz Truss tried to pull a Reagan, and it blew up in her face. And so the Republican Party, unlike the Tories in the United Kingdom, who are, will continue to try these things, but at the very least, they're just going to back off and say, well, I guess we've got to come up with some other way to make rich people rich. Here in the United States, what's going on with big bucks from a lot of right-wing billionaires is a program to basically end democracy in the United States, to replace majority rule with permanent minority rule. And they're doing this very, very aggressively. Unless you can convince me otherwise, do you have some other explanation for why the GOP is openly embracing fascists like Orban and what's her name, Meloni? Yeah, Meloni, the new leader in Italy, and Putin? I don't get it beyond that. We have a great geeky science today. Most people have heard of oxytocin. It is a hormone that the body releases during sex, during kissing, hugging, touching, just walking by and putting your hand on somebody's shoulder causes an immediate release of oxytocin in their body. We get oxytocin when we're touched. There are some studies that indicate that smaller levels of oxytocin appear in people's bloodstreams when they're simply told things that they interpret as the verbal equivalent of affection. I love you, or you're doing a great job, that kind of thing. That there is a certain level of oxytocin that comes along with that. But the really big bursts of oxytocin come from cuddles and hugs and of course, sex. Well, now they did these initial studies with zebrafish. Zebrafish have the ability to regrow damaged heart tissue, which is something that is, generally speaking, damaged heart tissue doesn't regrow. It gets replaced by scar tissue. But in zebrafish, they actually regrow it. And what they found when they looked at the zebrafish, as their hearts were damaged, and then they intentionally damaged their hearts, and then they would measure what's going on in their body and their metabolism, try and figure out how their hearts get rebuilt. And it turned out that the hormone that was mediating the process was oxytocin. That the zebrafish were releasing oxytocin in response to injury, and it was rebuilding their heart muscles. And so now they're looking at this of using oxytocin. Actually, I mean, it's a hormone that they can separate out and give you an injection of. And now there's this big study that shows that where they're exposing human heart tissue to high levels of oxytocin in the test tube, it has proven to work. Heart tissue actually regenerates itself in the in the test tube in vitro, but they haven't done these studies in humans yet. You're experimenting with people who just had heart attacks. That's kind of a tough thing. But bottom line, it sure does look like if somebody has an injured heart, the best thing you can do for them, or if you're the person with the injured heart, the best thing you can do is get hugged, get some cuddles, get some affection, get a massage. Massages do this. Receiving a massage produces oxytocin. It's a fascinating geeky science. It was originally published over at the Daily Mail, and it's something. It's really worth checking out. So, it's 16 minutes past the hour. Our lines are full. I'll be picking up your phone calls on the other side of this break for the rest of the hour. We've covered a lot of territory here. That why Babcock Ranch fared better during Hurricane Ian, and how this is an example for all of us. Why did DeSantis wait to respond? That was all in our first hour. How far is the Supreme Court going to go before we regulate them? Also in our first hour. Michael Cohen was with us in the second hour talking about the Trump crime family.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
In the second hour, we got into how OPEC is going to meet on Wednesday and jack up oil and gasoline prices on us. And now we have this, the Carlson-Kremlin conspiracy loop. And welcome back. Let's pick up some of your phone calls here. Let's see who's been waiting the longest. There we go. Jim in Columbus, Ohio. Hey, Jim. Thanks for sticking on hold there. What's on your mind today? Thanks for listening to WGR.
I've just been sitting here having my lunch, Tom.
Okay.
Listening to your show.
Thank you.
Okay, very quickly. A little bit of technology along with the science we've discussed today about electricity, solar panels. One of the issues that American public does not know about right under their noses is the absolute and complete change of lighting products. The whole entire United States is nearly 90% complete in their switch from incandescent and fluorescent type of lighting products to LED, light-emitting diodes. And they're just taking over everywhere. They're reducing the amount of electrical draw on the grid everywhere. And yet, I hear people worried about what batteries are going, the problems of batteries. If people knew the amount of damage done by the old fluorescent products, God, it's immense in our environment.
Yeah.
But at least that's coming to a halt now.
Right, and they also had mercury on.
Yeah, exactly. And all this has been done under the noses of Americans who have no idea.
Yeah, and this is why I say don't worry about plugging your electric car in. I mean, as I said earlier to that fellow who was doom and glooming about, well, if everybody got electric cars, oh my God. An electric car draws, mine does, pulls about 14 amps, 1,400 watts roughly at 100 volts, maybe 1,500 watts. And, that's 15 100-watt light bulbs. Well, now, and probably between my living room, kitchen, and bedroom, there are 15 light bulbs because it's got recessed light, in the ceiling. Well, now, instead of having 100-watt light bulbs, 1,500 watts of electricity, I've got 3, 4, 5-watt LED bulbs that are producing the same amount of light, But now I've got 15 bulbs that are pulling 5 watts each, which is 5 times, what is that, 65 watts total for the whole house instead of 1,500 watts. So now plugging in my car just consumes the exact identical amount of electricity that my house was designed for, just for the lights in the living room, kitchen, and bathroom, or bedroom.
Yeah, right, exactly. And all this has been taking into effect over this past decade, and the change is almost complete.
Yep. It's just there's incandescent bulbs burn out after a few years, and probably within 2 or 3 years there won't be any left. I mean, you can't even buy them anymore.
They're going to be gone.
Yeah.
No, right, exactly. Yeah. Okay, I've said my piece.
Okay, well, thanks a lot, Jim, for the call. It's great to hear from you. And let me just double down on that. I mean, this guy called. This is one of the favorite talking points that you will hear on right-wing hate radio whenever they talk about electric vehicles. Is, oh my God, if you get enough people plugging these things in, they're going to brown out the grid. No, they're not. The grid has a lot of excess capacity right now, in large part because of exactly what Jim was just talking about, which is that we're not drawing anything close to the power we used to. Plus, the grid is designed for peak capacity during the day, air conditioners in the summer, heat in the winter, when you need the maximum amount of lights. That's basically from 3 until 7 p.m. That's what the grid is designed for. Well, every electric car made is programmable about when, you plug it in, but it doesn't start drawing power until a particular time. And you can say only charge overnight when the electricity is cheap. Missed my opening rant today? It's usually published over at HartmannReport.com, where you can read it and share it with your friends for free. Check it out, HartmannReport.com. I'm hearing rejoin music. What is meat meal and why is it in your dog's food? As awful as it sounds, meat. I thought I had a live read. Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. And Dave in Federal Way, Washington. Hey, Dave, what's on your mind today?
Hey, not too much, Tom. Hey, I'm in Canby, Oregon, the beautiful Canby, Oregon this morning, actually.
Oh, cool.
But, yeah, hey, I just wanted to say right from the get-go, because I don't want, to get slaughtered later, I believe in my mind this is all 100% Donald Trump's fault, the state we're in right now with a semi-war with Russia, all right? And I also think on the big macro view, you were totally right. But I think we are all, naturally so, getting caught in our feedback loops, our echo chambers. But I really wanted to draw attention to how dangerous the echo chamber on the right wing is, because it's dangerous for a lot of reasons. But the main reason is they are going to reverse it. They are going to reverse it 180 degrees, and we're all going to say—
They're going to reverse what?
Here's what they're going to reverse. They're going to go from their seeming admiration for Vladimir Putin's Russia to absolute mortal enemies. And, Donald Trump himself keeps saying it every now and again. No one was harder on Vladimir Putin than I was. He says that. And to us, it sounds ridiculous because we're kind of in our feedback loop.
Yeah.
But the thing is—
Well, they're going to make their turn, in my opinion. Dave, I don't disagree with you. And I think that the turn that you're going to hear from the Republicans against Putin, which, by the way, is not going to happen against Orban. It's not going to happen against Bolsonaro. It's not going to happen against the new Italian prime minister. But it is going to happen against Putin. I think it's going to happen when Russia is very close to when it is irrefutably obvious that Putin has lost power.
Well, the thing is what they both, what Vladimir Putin likes and what the Republican Party likes are illiberal, a facade of democracy.
Correct.
But the problem is, you have said it a million times, and I know last time I brought up Russia might disintegrate into warlordism, and they got on your nerves, and I understand why. Look, fascism, patriarchy, and authoritarianism, all that stuff has one major problem. And Mikhail Khodorkovsky said it best over the weekend. He said Vladimir Putin has literally put his life on the line. This may end in him being killed. And Mikhail Khodorkovsky is not the type of person that would, give credit to Vladimir Putin. Right. Vladimir Putin imprisoned him. The reason why is in these authoritarian systems, it's in mammalian psychology, okay? When the alpha male fails, okay, all the blame. That's why Hitler, you've talked about it, Hitler killed himself in that bunker because he knew there was nothing else he could do. And this is why, like I heard David Petraeus say something extraordinary over the weekend, and I've known David Petraeus for years. And also my favorite general, I'm biased, is General Wesley Clark. What he said this morning was extraordinary. Wesley Clark actually said Americans are being fed an information operation. Okay, I was like, wow, I can't believe you said that. And David Petraeus, when Breonna Keeler was asking him questions over the weekend, one question he even admitted was important. He would not let her get it. He would not let her get that question in. He just kept talking over her. David Petraeus is a classy guy. He never does that, Tom. The problem is Russia has been practicing tactical nuclear warfare as a response since 1999, and they're not doing it. They're not doing it. And what worries me, Tom, is when this patriarchal fascistic system in Russia collapses, all right, they will have no choice then. Vladimir Putin will see his survival linked to detonating nuclear weapons over what we call...
I think he's close to it. And right now you've got some major Ukrainian victories happening in Russian-controlled territory that is now, according to Putin, Russia. And he has said he will respond to that with nukes. And I'm wondering, is he just waiting for them to take a large enough territory and bring enough Ukrainian troops in there that they're sitting ducks for a nuke?
Well, what he's done is he's filtered all the people out. Like that one guy, he made me laugh. He said the Russians were torturing him, and they asked him one question: "Are you pro-Ukrainian?" And he said, "I am Ukrainian. Of course I'm pro-Ukrainian." They let him go. He was an older guy. They took his son. They are filtering out anybody that looks at the internet, Tom. They are trying to keep people that are irrelevant to their political aspirations. The Russians are. Now, pretty soon they are going to get fatigued with those. Vladimir Putin is going to get tired of those people, and he's just going to drop a nuke on them. And the problem is where is it going to go from there? We've had Russian and Chinese battleships massing off the Aleutian Islands. We do not know exactly when this thing collapses. And this is why I don't like the Republican Party and will never support the Republican Party. When these patriarchal systems collapse, calamity and disaster follows. I promise you.
No, it's always been the case, Dave. I mean, you know, the collapse of strongman leaders almost always leads to war. Dave, thank you for the call. It is a very dangerous time for all of us, for the world. If ever there was a time to pray for peace, this is it. And pass the ammunition, as the old World War II song went. We'll be right back. It's 27 minutes past the hour.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
It's talk media for the sane among us. Yes, there are some of us left. We'll be back in 5 minutes. Our book today in the Thom Hartmann Book Club is The Hidden History of American Healthcare: Why Sickness Bankrupts You and Makes Others Insanely Rich by me. I wrote this book. This is from the introduction, the title, How a Single-Payer Healthcare Systems Help Stop COVID-19. Healthcare systems can be national security systems. Just ask anyone from Taiwan. From January 20th, 2020, on January 20, 2020, the United States recorded its first known case of COVID-19 infection. The following day, Taiwan got their first one, too. By the end of April, over 1 million Americans were infected with the virus. But Taiwan had recorded only 388 infections, and their last case of local transmission was on April 12th. A few had arrived on aircraft from other countries. All were contained by quarantine. As of this writing, in September 2020, there hadn't been a single new case or a single death in Taiwan since April. The economy never shut down, and as of this writing, was projected to have grown nearly 2% in 2020. Business, restaurants, theaters, and sports events were all open. Life was back to normal, albeit a mask-wearing normal. And it was made possible by their national single-payer healthcare system and their citizens' willingness to do their bit for the collective good. Back in the 1980s, Taiwan was on the edge of moving toward a democracy after a military coup in the 1960s. And about 40% of Taiwanese families did not have health insurance. If somebody in a family got sick, the cost of care often wiped out that family, and demands for reform were loud across the nation. Yue Reinhardt was a German-born healthcare economist married to a Taiwanese woman, and he attended a conference on healthcare in Taipei in 1989. His presentation impressed representatives of the government in attendance, and while he was still in town for the conference, they asked him for his best suggestion for a national healthcare system. He and his wife went back to their hotel and discussed the issue in depth, finally deciding that a single-payer national system would be the most cost-effective, efficient, and comprehensive program possible. He shared his thoughts with the government representatives, and the next day he left Taiwan to go back to Princeton, where he was an economic professor. 6 months later, though, a representative of Taiwan's government called him to say that they were going to take up his suggestion and asked him to help craft their healthcare program. He enthusiastically agreed, and by 1995, Taiwan had instituted one of the world's best single-payer healthcare systems. Today, everybody in Taiwan is fully covered for doctor and hospital services. Everybody has a driver's license-like healthcare card, which accesses their entire medical history. They can book a doctor's appointment on any computer terminal in the country, and the entire cost of the system is a bit more than 6% of Taiwan's GDP. For comparison, in the United States, healthcare consumes 24% of our GDP. Because there is no insurance company intermediaries sucking profits off the system in Taiwan. When COVID-19 hit, Taiwan chose not to use the blunt force technique of shutting down their economy and locking people in. Instead, they took on the coronavirus with an aggressive nationwide test and contact trace program tied into the National Health Service database. Every infected person was identified and put into a comfortable quarantine, and every person he or she had come into contact with, even very marginal contacts, were also tested and their contacts traced. By April, just a bit more than 2 months after the first case surfaced, the country had the coronavirus isolated and completely under control. By quarantining inbound visitors to the nation island of 23 million, they were able, as of this writing, to keep it that way. Maintaining public health is one of the most important functions of any nation's healthcare system. Because America's is so fragmented, it's inconceivable that our nation could respond to an epidemic, a pandemic, or another public health disaster with the speed and elegance of Taiwan or any of the world's other nations with single-payer Medicare for all types of systems. It's like Stockholm Syndrome, a friend who's a psychotherapist said, describing the way that Americans have clung for more than 5 generations to a for-profit health insurance system, while the rest of the world figured out how to provide health care to all their citizens at a much lower price. People know it and have become familiar with it, she added. They just can't imagine anything else. It's probably the largest con job ever perpetrated on the American people, one that has cost trillions of dollars and millions of lives. It's been going on since the 1940s. If it were a scientific experiment, it would have been shut down by the ethics review panels generations ago. This experiment in providing health care via a for-profit insurance system has led to the deaths of more Americans than we lost in World War II. Every year, over 500,000 Americans go bankrupt, often losing everything they've worked their entire lives for because somebody in their family got sick. That's 500,000 families a year, every year, for the past few decades. And the coronavirus, of course, has only made things worse. Perhaps most galling, this massive ripoff is costing our entire nation and each of us individually a fortune. Insurance premiums right now make up 22% of all taxable payroll, well above what the cost of Medicare for all would be at around 14% when first put into place, dropping down to around 10% within a few years as previously uninsured people get their health needs up to date. As the health insurance, drug, and hospital parasites push their suckers deeper and deeper into our body politic, spending on health care by Americans went up 25% between 2000 and 2014. The book, The Hidden History of American Health Care by Thom Hartmann. Our 1-hour free podcast recaps our show, and it's available wherever fine podcasts are found. And we have the full 3-hour podcast available over at thomhartmann.com if you want to really support our program. Our phrase for the day is narcissistic collapse. This is what happens when a person like Donald Trump with severe narcissistic personality disorder can no longer maintain the facade of their own greatness. When the lies that they have used to build this facade begin to disintegrate, they either implode, typically through drugs or alcohol or other kind of semi-suicidal behavior, or even suicide itself. They typically either implode, or more frequently they explode. They start blaming everybody around them or whatever institutions they can to deny that the collapse is their own fault. They cannot accept the blame. It's part of their narcissistic personality disorder. And instead, they go after the institutions or the people who are pointing out their failure. In the case of Donald Trump, going after the FBI, going after the courts. Look out. This is going to get really, really ugly. I've got a whole long video about it over at thomhartmann.com. Check it out. Welcome back. 35 minutes past the hour, picking up your calls. Richard in St. Louis, Missouri. Hey, Richard, what's on your mind today?
Yeah, hi, Tom. I just wanted to tell you that I think you are spot on talking about the October surprise in oil and gas prices.
Yeah, they're meeting on Wednesday. I think they're going to jack up. I think we're going to see $5-6 a gallon gas before November 8th.
Well, there's an aspect to that I've been noticing for a couple of weeks now, and that is I'm traveling. I'm actually calling from northern Michigan, even though I'm from St. Louis. But Missouri's a red state, and our gasoline there now is $2.79 a gallon, and that's pretty nice. We're enjoying it. But up here in Michigan, it went from about $3.50 suddenly to $4.20 last week, pretty much statewide. And there's no real reason. Their gas tax is not any higher to speak of than ours.
Yeah.
And there's no distribution issues that I know of.
It's 5:35 here in Portland.
Coming. It's what?
It's 5:35 here in Portland.
Yeah, and that's kind of suspicious, I think.
Yeah. So the blue states are all seeing price increases in gasoline. And are you sure Missouri is still in $2 and change?
I am. Yes. I mean, not necessarily statewide, but in my community where I live, I just checked that today with people back home.
Wow.
And it's a red state, so I guess they don't feel like they have to influence anybody by jacking up the gas prices.
Right. Right. In fact, it works better for the policy. I mean, whenever the economy goes bad, there's like this wave, this revulsive movement of throw the bums out, regardless of who the bums are and regardless of what the other issues are. And we'll see where this goes. It'd be interesting to hear from people around the country and find out if this is actually, a trend. Is gas cheap in red states and expensive in blue states? And if so, why? Richard, thank you for the call. Fred in Madison, Wisconsin. Hey, Fred, what's up?
Hey, Tom.
How are gas prices in Wisconsin?
Sorry. What was that?
I said, how are gas prices in Wisconsin?
They're actually they're below $4 a gallon. It's been a while since I filled up because I'm actually calling about a hybrid vehicle, and so that's why I don't fill up very frequently. But I think it's around like $3.50-ish, if I recall correctly. But anyways, yes, I wanted to share some vehicle feedback that runs counter to the disinformation generated by the fossil fuel industry. So I have a 2006 Generation 2 Prius. I purchased it in 2008 used.
Is that the plug-in Prius or just a regular hybrid Prius?
It's a regular hybrid Prius. Okay. Yep. And so it has over 197,000 miles on it now.
Wow.
It was actually totaled by my insurance company in 2020 after somebody ran a stop sign and hit the front end. But we got it repaired because it made sense to do so because we did get some money out of it. Mm-hmm. And it still gets 50 to 50 plus miles per gallon. And here's the kicker. It still has the original nickel metal hydride battery array that it came with.
Wow.
16 years and 197,000 miles later.
Yeah.
So the whole battery failure thing is just,
it's a canard.
It flies.
Yeah. You're absolutely right, Fred. We had a Prius similar to yours that we sold when we left Oregon. Must have been like 2008, I guess it was. And we had that ever since we had first moved to Oregon, which was, I forget what year, but anyhow, we put a lot of miles on it, and we never had a problem. And I'm not seeing any problem with the one we have now. We've had it for 5 years. Paul, thanks for the call. Excuse me if I got your name wrong, because this is Paul. Paul in Ambler, Pennsylvania. Hey, Paul, what's on your mind today?
Hi, Tom. I wanted to talk about Venezuela and its importance to oil.
Mm-hmm.
Venezuela was the founding nation of OPEC, the oil-producing and exporting countries.
I didn't know
It was a
that.
result of a World War II snub by FDR and the U.S. government. They threw in all their might with the Saudi Arabian government, the House of Saud, because they didn't want it to fall into the hands of the Soviet Union at the time. And that, as far as they knew, based on British information, was the largest source of proven reserves of oil in the world, along with the other Arab countries, which we know today to be, true. Kuwait, the United Arab Emirates, Iran, Iraq, all loaded with oil. But it turned out Venezuela also had very high proven reserves, and as of much more recently, it seems that their reserves are the equal to Saudi Arabia.
Yeah, they're huge.
However,
although it is high sulfur oil.
Yeah, but it's also a hop, skip, and a jump to Houston, as opposed to going all the way across the Atlantic. At any rate, up until about 10 years ago, the top 5 sources for oil imports was Canada, Mexico, Venezuela, and Nigeria. They had completely bypassed the Middle East because it was too unstable, and for geopolitical, strategic reasons, those were our main suppliers. However, the powers that be went to war against Venezuela. Venezuela has its own retail gas company. It's called Citgo.
Right.
Citgo was the main gas pump at all the 7-Elevens all over the United States. And when they decided to have these diplomatic sanctions to undercut Hugo Chavez, that went out the window.
Right. That was during the Bush administration, wasn't it? George W. Bush?
Right. And 7-Eleven's also headquartered in Dallas. It's the Southland Corporation.
Right.
For those who know. At any rate, we have been sanctioning and basically waging economic war that's completely destroyed the Venezuelan economy. But that recently, since we've been finding these problems with Russia and their brinksmanship with oil, it looks like Venezuelan diplomatic ties have been refreshed or reignited to the point where now, over the weekend, the seemingly out of nowhere announcement of about a half a dozen unlawfully detained American citizens who happen to be Citgo oil executives are going to be released.
Yeah, I saw that. In fact, I retweeted that, and I said, I hope this is the beginning of a new rapprochement with Venezuela that not only will work to the advantage of the Western Hemisphere, but keep in mind it was Venezuelan refugees that DeSantis paid to fly from Texas up to Martha's Vineyard with his state money that went to a big donor.
Right.
Wouldn't it be nice to stem the flow of refugees too?
I think what we're seeing is a massive geopolitical realignment, and you're going to see the Middle East cut out, and South
Russia.
America. Well, yeah, I don't even want to talk about what's going to happen there. No one understands the insanity that's emanating from that.
Well, Russia's now selling to India and China in a big way. and you know that they've found new markets for their oil. But I'm with you, Paul. I think that there is a realignment coming, and I think also that Russia in cutting off their oil or their natural gas to Western Europe, and this was a huge mistake. I mentioned earlier Hermann Scheer's member of parliament, the German member of parliament, his 100,000 rooftop program. The thing that blew that up, it worked. It turned out to be over 1 million rooftops by the time they stopped the program. But when they stopped the program, they stopped it in large part because Gerhard Schroeder, who was the prime minister at the time, or the chancellor, or whatever his title is, in Germany, had cut a deal with the Russians to bring all this natural gas in. And so, hey, we don't need all these more rooftop solar panels. Well, it turns out that Schroeder, after he retired, has been being paid $1 million a year for being on the board of Gazprom, the Russian gas company. So you've got a corrupt German politician who backstabbed Germany, and he's very much being viewed by Germans as not their favorite politician any longer, shall we say.
Well, all of the geopolitical moves that have to do with these petro-states, including Russia, Saudi Arabia, instead of investing their money in what's going to be a future of electricity, they're going to war.
I know. They're investing in climate denial. Like the guy who called in the first hour and was like, "Well, if everybody went and had electric cars, we'd just brown out the grid," and which is just complete nonsense. Paul, I got to move along, but thank you for the call. Spot on. It's 45 minutes past the hour here on your media support group for We the People, the Thom Hartmann Program, fair and only slightly unbalanced.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit thomhartmann.com for audio and video archives.
Right back with your calls in just a moment. Stick around. Annette in Baltimore, Maryland. Hey, Annette, thanks for watching Free Speech TV. What's on your mind today?
Hi. I was wondering, when I read the Constitution about impeachment, it didn't say they had to be convicted. Once impeached, always impeached. We refer to presidents that have been impeached as being impeached. So, if they don't have to be convicted, it also said an impeached president can't pardon nobody.
Well, no, that last statement of yours is not accurate, Annette.
Okay.
But replace the word impeachment in your mind with the word indicted. Right? If a criminal has been indicted for a crime, they're an indicted criminal, and they're an indicted criminal or once indicted criminal for the rest of their lives, arguably. An impeached president has been essentially indicted by the House of Representatives. Then a trial is held where the president can make a defense. That happens in the Senate. And only after the president has been impeached and removed from office can they no longer pardon people.
Does it say that? Because I didn't read that part.
Well, it's the pardon power only extends to a president while he or she is president. So
I got that.
So if they're convicted in the Senate, they would no longer be president. Thus, they would not be able to impeach.
But my point was, it didn't say that they had to be convicted. I understand it's a two-part thing, and I understand that an impeachment is an indictment.
Right.
But you still, once you're indicted, you still were indicted, even if you wasn't convicted.
Yeah. I'm not sure exactly. Do you remember where the impeachment power is in the Constitution?
No, I would have to pull that out. But I did read it when we were going over, when all of that mess was going on. Mm-hmm. And that was, it just never said that they had to be convicted. And since we refer to impeached presidents as once impeached, always impeached, regardless if they were convicted or not.
Okay. Article 2, Section 4, Sean says. No, that's the impeachment of. Should be removed from impeachment, but that's not the pardon power part.
Right.
Yeah.
Because it was about them being able to do stuff. I understand that the two-part, like that. Yeah, so that's what
I was sadly, it's not the case because, as you might have noticed, Donald Trump continued to pardon people after he was impeached.
Well, I believe the Democrats, they don't use everything that is possible. for them to do. They don't question stuff because, in my opinion, in matter of the perception. Oh Lord, because also the other thing was when, as far as I'm not too upset with the electoral college stuff. If they, as far as when I read it, it says that they don't have to accept who the people pick. And that the guidelines that they were given was that they wasn't supposed to allow an unjust or immoral person or something like that to take office.
That was the theory.
They should have did their job.
Yeah, well, I'm with you on that. Except that the individual states had all passed laws saying that whoever gets the most votes gets the electoral college votes.
I'm all for that.
Yeah, well, and that's the way it is. But they're going before the Supreme Court now and saying we ought to be able to change the laws after the election. We should be able to pick whoever we want. Yeah, I'm with you in that.
I was just saying, in that case, then the second runner-up, because this was, Lord knows we knew we were into trouble to let that criminal. He's always been a criminal.
Yeah, he has always been. You're absolutely right, Annette. Bad guys, tough guys, there's a certain appeal in the minds of some people, particularly the authoritarian followers. Annette, thank you for the call. It's nice to hear from you. It's 10 minutes before the hour. We'll be right back. Hey, I have a new book out. It's called The Hidden History of Neoliberalism, How Reaganism Gutted America and How to Restore Its Greatness. Greg Palast calls it a hand grenade of a book. You can pick it up wherever fine books are available. Tag you're it. There's an amazing number of criminal and civil investigations and lawsuits against Donald Trump, that range from the espionage grand jury investigation. This is a federal criminal investigation into Trump and people around him committing espionage, to the January 6th grand jury investigation, a separate grand jury looking into the crime of trying to overthrow the government. Obviously, you've got the Trump Organization tax fraud investigation, Letitia James in New York State. You've got the Trump Organization tax fraud being investigated also by the city. Fulton County, Georgia is looking into, Trump's attempts to get 11,780 votes out of Brad Raffensperger. You got the January 6th committee that goes, without elaboration. The Senate is investigating Bill Barr's Justice Department, the former Justice Department. And then there's a whole series of individual lawsuits against Trump, from Mary Trump to others. I've got a video with a complete list over at thomhartmann.com. Check it out. 51 minutes past the hour, picking up your calls. Martha in Menominee, Wisconsin. Hey, Martha, what's on your mind today?
Hey, Tom, I'm going to make your Monday. I'm going to be your good news gal from Wisconsin.
Okay.
We brought you Bob LaFollette. Now we're bringing you Mandela Barnes. And here's what's on my ballot. My county board of supervisors went to bat for health insurance for all of our citizens. Here, I'm going to read it to you. It's real quick. Quote, shall Congress and the President of the United States enact into law the creation of a publicly financed, nonprofit, national health insurance program that would fully cover medical care costs for all Americans. That is on my ballot because one of my county supervisors went to bat and showed a very conservative board. I mean, I'm in western Wisconsin here, Tom. Showed a very majority conservative board of supervisors that, you know what? We could save a whole lot of money all across the county, besides all the other things we do, like run the jail. And
so this is only on your county ballot, Martha? This is not on the statewide ballot?
It's on my ballot in my county because my board of supervisors approved it in a referendum.
That is great news.
So progressive politics is alive and well in little old Wisconsin. I knew you'd be happy to hear it.
Thank you, Martha. That is great news.
Spread the word, Tom.
Yeah, and it's also a great example. Everybody should be working on doing the exact same thing. Martha, thank you for that. Dan in Newark, New Jersey, it says you disagree with me, Dan. What's that? What's up?
I do, Tom. Good afternoon or good morning. I'm sorry to disagree with you sometimes, but going back to the guy with the gas prices.
Yeah.
Michigan has a 45-cent gas, 45.17 gas tax per gallon. And Missouri, I think he brought up, was only 19. So that's a little bit of it.
Okay.
So it's not just, it's you guys always say red states and blue states. It's just the policies of the states.
Could be.
No, it is. It's not could be because you have a Democratic governor who rolls, and what's gone in Michigan has been horrible lately.
Yeah.
I've got family there. And the thing, Missouri's got 19 cents a gallon. And, if you look through there's a map on the internet, and I'm pretty sure it's a legit map. You can see the gas prices and the taxes. PA's got the second highest in the country. Did you know that? It's 58 cents a gallon, PA.
Pennsylvania, PA.
Yes, sir.
Yeah.
And I work there a lot.
So you think you think the entire variation from state to state around the United States has nothing to do with politics? It's all based on local gas taxes.
I think it has a lot to do with politics. That's my point. It has a lot to do with the state government and whatever the
politics via the gas tax. Okay, Dan. You appear to be more well informed about this than I am. Let me do some digging and see what I can come up with. Thanks for the call, Chris in San Diego. Hey, Chris, what's up?
Hey, Tom. I just got my own little personal conspiracy theory. I don't think that Putin is going to use tactical nuclear weapons. I think he's going to intentionally blow up one of the nuclear power plants there in Ukraine. That gives him the excuse to pull out of the war because now it's not worth it anymore. And, he'll obviously blame somebody else for it. But this gives him that excuse that we can't be over there anymore because now it's dangerous.
The two nuclear power plants that have been shelled are both east of Kyiv, and the prevailing winds are out of the west, which means if either one of them went down, it would carry the radioactive plume over Russia. How does that help Putin?
Well, how would it if he used nuclear or if he used tactical nuclears? It's still going to be the same thing, right?
Well, no, it would be very different. A tactical nuclear weapon, a 10 or 15 kiloton nuclear weapon will do a mind-boggling amount of damage. But I don't believe that the amount of radiation that would be released could be anything close to what you would see if a nuclear power plant melted down. I could be wrong, but I believe that the Chernobyl meltdown released radiation on an order of magnitude beyond anything that Hiroshima or Nagasaki did.
Sure. I thought that the fuel that they use in a nuclear power plant is like 5% of what they use in a nuclear bomb.
It's 5% concentrated in terms of the of plutonium and the plutonium bombs, and 235 or 238? Maybe it's 230, whichever is the one that explodes most readily. But all of the other isotopes are still there. And in fact, most of the damage that's done from nuclear power plants melting down is not uranium damage, it's cesium and strontium, which are the breakdown products of uranium through the process of generating electricity. It's kind of a different dynamic. This is a good question, Chris. I'm offering you an opinion, not an actual fact here. I mean, double check this. This is something we should get Kevin Camp on from Beyond Nuclear and just ask him, what's the difference between a low-yield nuclear weapon and a nuclear power plant going down? I suspect there's a huge difference, but I may be wrong. Chris, thank you for the call, and thanks for watching us on Facebook Live. We'll be back tomorrow, same time, same bat time, same bat channel. In the meantime, don't forget democracy is not a spectator sport. Never was, never will be, wasn't planned that way. That's not where the word came from. It means rule by the people, demos. So get out there, get active, be part of those people who are ruling. Tag you're it. Have a great afternoon. We'll see you tomorrow.
You've been listening to Thom Hartmann. For audio and video archives, visit thomhartmann.com.
In addition to bringing you the Thom Hartmann Program here on Free Speech TV and Video Media Online, we also have a whole set of ways you can interact with us and tools you can use to spread the word about the importance of democracy and the threats to it in our republic. First, there's your daily homework. Sue Nethercutt puts together a daily email newsletter that has a link to every story I discuss on the air, so you can find my sources and you can share them with your friends. It's free and you can sign up at thomhartmann.com. Second, I publish my daily take every day over at the hartmannreport.com website. That's also free if you want the daily 5 days a week rant in your inbox. No ads either. Third, we have the podcasts. There's the free 1-hour version of our daily show that's advertising supported. You can find that wherever you get your podcasts normally. And then there's also the podcast of the entire 3-hour show with no advertisements, and that's available by subscription over at thomhartmann.com. So check them all out at thomhartmann.com and hartmannreport.com.
We say fight back!